think it's September 21st. This is just at that top or two. I go up the governor's order canceled.
All right, I think we'll go ahead and convene the meeting. I forget, are we broadcasting over the internet?
We are.
Okay, so as I welcome everyone to the final meeting of the Advisory Committee on Higher Education Cost Efficiencies, let me remind you that we are live via the internet. Anything you say or do can and will be held against you. So behave accordingly. I think that we were expecting 15 or 16 of our 20 committee members here today, and of course most are here. There may be one or two or three that are on their way. I know I know we're going to be missing at least 5, including, I guess, Mary Earl Nye, as of yesterday, had a change in schedule that was going to preclude his being here. So that would be 15. Thank you for your participation. I brought this not because I mean to delve into this big, thick black folder here, but because this represents the work, the minutes, the ideas, the reports of all of our previous meetings, and it. Let me say, my arm was sore when I got upstairs, so a lot of effort has gone into this, but effort is really, as we've talked about, not what matters, it's results. And so here today with the goal of trying to synthesize this final draft report and its recommendations to the coordinating board for the coordinating board's consideration and presentation of a final report to the governor. And I want to reassure everyone that everyone's input and feedback on this the revised draft we'll be reviewing today will be included in the information that goes to the coordinating board and stays with and as a part of that reporting process. But at the end of the day, we hope to have, through some small group, we'll break into 4 groups as we've done in the past to try to develop, review the 5 big ideas, the 5 categories, and see if we have basically relative consensus on that. We'll start with a little higher level, large group discussion on 2 or 3 questions regarding the report as a whole, and then Patty will kind of lead us through the methodology of how we work towards reviewing the report and making our final comments together. Commissioner, let me turn it over to you and ask for any of your comments or overview.
I'll keep my comments very brief. I think that we've got a very good draft. I think that there are some very good ideas in this document. One of the issues that Fred and I and Brenda and some others talked about last week, the landscape and cost analysis and the examination of cost efficiencies is moving very, very rapidly all over the country. And I wanted to say that, and this is a comment I made to Fred and Brenda, that I would like to make certain that members of the advisory committee understand that we're still looking at data. There's a new report that just came out that we haven't had a chance to look at. It's called Cutting Costs: A Trustee's Guide to Tough Economic Times. It's published by the American Council of Trustees and Alumni, the Institute for Effective Governance. And we're finding documents like this all the time. We haven't obviously had a chance to bring them to the attention of the advisory committee, but I would like the support of the advisory committee that we can continue to take a look at some of these issues and evaluate some of the recommendations, evaluate some of the policies that have been implemented around the country, and let you know that we would like to, if we come up with some very good ideas, we'll figure out a way to vet these with members of the advisory committee, but to consider these up until we have to prepare the final draft of the document. There won't be any substantial change. Most of this will be emphasizing detail under the general recommendations that have been discussed and approved by, or at least vetted by the advisory committee. But and there's some other areas where I found a level of detail that I think might be valuable to place into the final report. One of the comments we've received from members of this committee is that there are areas where there is specificity lacking, and we can fill that in. But once again, there's information that's appearing all the time that we would like to evaluate. States are taking a very serious look at this issue even as we speak. So the ultimate document, I would like to make sure that people understand that I'm going to recommend that if we see some real good ideas we haven't fully vetted, that we try to find a way to consider them in the final document and circulate them among you. But it's still a work in process. I'd like to use every possible minute we have to make this a stronger document, consistent with meeting deadlines and, of course, putting this final report before the coordinating board for approval. So I just wanted to make that point.
Thank you, Commissioner. One bit of housekeeping, of course, on your agendas is to approve the minutes from our May 11th meeting. I'm sure everybody has 100% clear memory of the discussion from 3 months ago. And so I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes if everyone's had an opportunity to review them.
So moved.
Have a motion from Woody and a second from Roberto. All in favor of approving the minutes from our May meeting, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. The materials that are in your folders today include, and plus a couple of other handouts at the table, include a summary that Patty has prepared of all the discussions from our January through May meetings, 11-page summary of those, some 30 different categories of recommendations and ideas. There is a clean copy of the draft report from the advisory committee dated August 10th, and in addition, there is a August 16th draft of the initial economic or cost-benefit impact that Lee Holcomb with our Higher Education Policy Institute has been working on. We wanted to try to provide some order of magnitude for the ideas and recommendations that have gone forward into the draft report. And of course, there's the agenda and the minutes, and Mary has handed out some comments that we've received by email, including some of those who weren't able to be here with us to participate directly, and some who are, and then some worksheets that we'll be using later and we'll explain later. So those are the materials that you have available to you today. An overview of the report, Raymond said there are still some ideas that we're working on. What I would like to start as our group in discussion is to talk about first the tone of the report, its overall import. Secondly, whether we've identified the right big ideas, or more to the point, whether there are any big ideas or clear recommendations that you feel were important enough that they're missing from this report. And then thirdly, if there's any other major adjustments or overall remarks on the report. And then once we've gone through that discussion, I think, so I've got 10 after 10. That clock back there says 10:15. I'm not sure which is right, but we need to break about what time to begin our small group discussion? 10:30, so approximately 20 minutes. So let me start. I know some of you have, either through email or just through conversation, have wanted to make some remarks. So, Commissioner, do you have anything to add at this point?
No.
With that, focusing on the tone of the report as well as the broad view of the content, I think I'm going to start with Woody. I know you had some comments you wanted to make, and then we'll just kind of go around the table to see who else would like to weigh in on these topics.
Mr. Chairman, I think the report reflects a lot of progress, but it also reflects kind of the ongoing tension that I've seen forever between the desire to control inputs and a focus on outputs. And to me, from a cost efficiency standpoint, from a state view, the most important output to focus on is your number of degrees and your cost per degree. And obviously, the lower the cost per degree, the more degrees you can accomplish with a given sum of money. And if we are going to, and I see that tension throughout, and we can talk about as we go through the day-to-day when we look at specific recommendations, do they fall into an output focus, or do they fall into the input, what I'd call the micromanaging, where we're essentially working perhaps at cross purposes with the output focus. But if we do want to take an output focus, and certainly the first section here talks about incentivizing degrees and completions, I still feel that, as I've communicated before, that we need to move to an international benchmarking standards. In other words, to say that our goal is 5.7% of the population participating in higher education, to me, is not necessarily meaningful as far as the competitiveness of our workforce, and certainly is not best practices today. I think the OECD pretty well sets the standards as far as benchmarking, and it is higher education attainment of your workforce, and there's good reason for that because of the increasing correlation between higher education attainment and the income of your society, and obviously the quality of life that's driven by that. So when we don't go in that way, and I know this report doesn't include our college-going culture, our advertising campaign, but to me, we're missing a big opportunity there to essentially enter the world competition and say this is where we are and this is where we need to go, and that's why we need to change our view of the requirements of completion. So, and I don't know how you do that if you don't. I don't know how you do it successfully if we don't benchmark on standards that are both at the national and certainly have been at the international level. So I think that's consistent with an output focus. And I think the second thing, when you become output focused and you look at benchmarking is all in completions. So that gets back to closing the gaps and where we have 4 goals, and we really don't differentiate or prioritize between participation, success, excellence, and research competitiveness. But I think the international standards, if you adopt those, they lead you toward success or completions is really your priority. And the other ones, while they might be important, are of a secondary importance. So at least my argument would be, if we're going to focus, and I think this report is trying to move toward outputs, to me that's the most cost-effective way, but you need to benchmark and you need to be very specific on what output are you trying to incentivize. And that would be my overall comment on the report.
Okay, and that's very consistent with the letter that you provided to our coordinating boards at the last meeting that was distributed to our board members as well. I'll come back to that because I've got some, the coordinating board's long-term strategic planning has been looking at exactly what you're describing.
Yeah, and I know that we've had these discussions before, and I know there's a lot of our, I wouldn't call it disagreement, but is a timing issue. My only concern is that time is of the essence, and 2015 is a long way off, and we need to move sooner rather than later, given the challenges that are in front of us.
Thank you, Woody. Other comments from board members regarding the tone, or whether there's elements that you felt are missing from this draft?
One of the things that I had written is that we know that these recommendations affect 3 different types of institutions. That's community colleges, general academic institutions, and health-related institutions. And I think we need to be more specific in the report as to each recommendation. Which group are we addressing in that recommendation? We started off with the first couple of recommendations. The first one, I think, addressed both the 2-year and 4-year institutions. Pretty specific. The second one, I think, addressed the 4-year institutions. And then we kind of got away from it in all the other recommendations. And some of these, the majority of them, I think, affect general academics and community colleges, but maybe not so the health-relateds. I also have a feeling, and I'm not going to speak for the general academics, but I have a feeling that some of the health professions, whether whether they're taught in a community college, a general academic, or a health-related institution, might not be covered in some of these. So possibly there's some health professions programs that need to be exempted from some of these recommendations. So I thought a little deeper look in that capacity would be necessary. Then I also have an issue as it pertains to the charging departments for space, because I just feel that's totally a budgetary issue. I mean, I think it's chasing our tail to go out here and take, for example, most institutions budget utilities centrally. It's under the control of your physical plant, department to pay utilities. To break that up and farm that out to individual departments, to me, is a huge make-work exercise. I don't think you accomplish anything. What we really need in each institution, which I feel that we have, is a very strong space committee that meets regularly and that assigns space. For example, if a department today has more space than necessary and we break up utilities and farm that out, maybe that department gets more money than somebody else. I don't think you've accomplished anything. So I did voice an objection to that recommendation.
Elmo, can you give us on your comment regarding health professions and degrees for the health professions? Do you have a specific example or two in mind of how either this doesn't apply to them or they aren't included where they should be?
I'm not an expert as far as the academic requirements, but certain accrediting bodies, for example, in nursing, they've got a 10-to-1 kind of a student to faculty kind of ratio issue. I'm not exactly sure on the accrediting bodies what they're requiring, if they can all fit that 120-hour rule. Medical schools don't really produce semester credit hours. So when we talk about increasing faculty productivity by 10% as far as the semester credit hour that's taught, I'm not sure how that is applied to medical school faculty, the MDs. Those are some of the type of things.
And I think we're trying to deal with things at a fairly high level and not get too far down in the weeds. So I think we would all concede that in the discussion we all kind of recognized without defining that there would be exceptions. Accreditation requirements being a very good example where you'd have to have exceptions. But
somewhere down the road, somebody is going to be responsible for implementing some of these recommendations, and that's when the confusion starts setting in. And I would hope that we might be able to eliminate some of that confusion from the front end.
Okay.
I'd just like to briefly comment that the space allocation would be an example of what I would talk about inputs. In other words, us trying to essentially say, go do it, but then instead of decentralizing, allowing the CEOs to go produce more graduates, we also turn around and try to put in additional controls. And so that would be one example, to me at least, of attention. How do you bring about cost efficiency? Do you drive incentives to lower cost and use that, or do you try to do the make work? I mean, and I would agree with Elmo on that that's a make work project, trying to solve a problem that could be solved in an incentive way by taking state money that would be essential for capital expenditures, making it part of the formula, and letting each institution decide how they're going to spend that money. And if they don't want a building, they might want equipment, they might want a research team. But it gets the state out of the micromanaging which leads to things like, we want you to internally charge your space so that you know that you're using it efficiently. Well, if they're responsible for the dollar stream, they're going to use it as opposed to being incentivized to try to go get a building, because if they don't get the building, they don't get the funding. So.
Okay. Other comments? Scott?
And I appreciate both being a member of the committee and the work that's been done. And I do have a variety of more specific issues that I can get to you later. I guess I have two or three themes, a couple of which perhaps have already been touched on by Woody or Elmo. But one, I was particularly sensitive on some of the pathways to completion of potentially other barriers we may be perhaps inadvertently creating. So when we had statements, for example, requiring a percentage of the coursework to be taken through dual credit or online, etc. I mean, I understand the rationale behind that, but in some ways, at least as worded in the report, as operationalized, it really could have a reverse effect. Certainly it would perhaps make us more efficient and more ready to deal with our students, but it also creates an additional barrier. Similarly, when there was another requirement, degree plans by freshmen, which is a great idea, but a requirement by the end of the freshman year to meet with an advisor enrolling in a course not included in the degree plan. There still are choices that students make. I don't know how to bridge that and move us in the right direction, but not create those additional barriers. I was sensitive to areas where I thought we sort of added again, work or requirements. I'm not sure. I guess I'm generally, well, I don't know that I'm supportive of kind of a new institution for online learning. I don't know that adding that, and it may be the right thing to do, but it just, my antenna go up when I see sort of the potential for an additional kind of infrastructure around that. There was an oversight statewide continuous improvement council. I actually much prefer the sort of ad hoc work that's been done like this that comes from time to time rather than the establishment of a council, which again can create at least, and maybe it's just analogous with what we're trying to do on our campuses as we've looked to try to reduce those because when you establish one, there's work and there's additional assignments, etc. So there were several of those kinds of activities. I do think that there's some work that we can do to create a little bit more clarity, although the challenge that Woody mentioned is particularly vexing. It is exactly the right thing to do to try to find the right outputs and tie inputs to them, but in complex organizations like higher education, that's just really tough. And you can find surrogates in some ways, but there are consequences. The last comment I would make, the one area that I did find missing, and I read through it again, and it's there in part, but the one big idea that I found perhaps most attractive in our discussions were the early award programs that were talked about, creating in a contractual way a pathway and a set of
program.
Yeah,
that was one of two examples that in discussion leading up to this meeting have come up. Okay. So go ahead.
And I thought I didn't see that there were any losers in that. It allows, one of the challenges with student aid is you really kind of want it to be an entitlement in that they need to know it's there when they go, but you need to create opportunities to budget for that, and by setting those contracts early on, recognizing you can manage that process. Anyway, that was one that I thought was left out. And I have other comments, but I can save them for later.
Thank you, Scott. Any other comments as to the tone or major ideas? Rich?
In terms of the overall, first of all, I appreciate being on this committee and all the work that's been done, particularly by the private sector people. Part of our job to be here and to do these things, but the people from the private sector, I really appreciate their giving up their time to be on this committee. And as I tried to read this several times and look at our various audiences, one thing that in terms of tone, in the section that says assignments for all, I agree with the intent, but I guess I have some concern as an administrator of the system when we say campus level leaders can't or won't make changes called for in this report. I really think we can and we should, and we don't need to tell the state legislature or the governor, you need to force these on us or you need to give us incentives. We should do these because we're professionals. And so I just ask that you look at that language and see that perhaps we should put a burden on ourselves to take on these challenges in these difficult times to put together efficiencies and to evaluate efficiencies. Just quickly, because some of these things have been mentioned, creating new institutions. Perhaps the new institutions need to be created, as was mentioned earlier, but perhaps we can look at offering, again, opportunities for existing institutions to reinvent themselves or to take on some of these new techniques and new missions. So just saying we're going to create new institutions just seems to take a long time, and we may have people who are able and willing to take on that mission, who have the infrastructure already available to proceed. So I would suggest say, and I've got some other specific comments, but just overall, this charge for space discussion seems to have various views on it. If universities and university systems were very centralized, inputs and outputs would be easier to regulate and manage. But we had a speaker, and I thought they were very good in telling us what we don't know. And perhaps this charge for the space would truly give us an idea of what various programs cost. And without that information, there's, again, a big part of the cost of higher education. We don't know what that cost is. And so while I'm not big on requiring more reports and these mandates, because we have to go back and implement them, I think there's some real benefit of knowing what a program costs. And part of that program cost is the space involved. And I'll save my comments regarding lead and everything for the smaller groups.
Thank you, Rich. Just to clarify for those who may be listening on the internet, the two comments we've had regarding new institutions, it really, I think, pertain to a very specific, perhaps it could be better worded, but what was intended to be a relatively narrow mission, single institution that was an online-only institution initially offering associate degrees. Is that the recommendation that Scott, you and Rich were referring to?
Yes.
And creating a department, yeah, I think just we should see what's the best mechanism for achieving that goal. And it may not be in a new institution.
And that emanated out of the testimony we had from the chancellor from the University of Maryland, who said that they found, and we're actually trying to gather data that shows results that prove the assertion, that they found it was more effective to create a separate institution with the mission of online only rather than having the existing institutions put existing coursework online. So just that sidebar commentary is just to clarify what it is we're talking about. Further comments, right?
Just a couple of things. The recommendation here, I think somebody else alluded to it, the Continuous Improvement Council. I mean, if it's going to be statewide, that's one thing of a state agency. If it's focused on education, I wonder if it's not better housed within the existing coordinating board body, so we don't create more state agencies. The only other comment I had beyond what's already been stated is the push to use community colleges, and I understand and agree with it to a great extent, as a feeder program, if I can use that term, to the four-year institutions and have some of the coursework done at that lower cost institution. I think we've discussed in the past about some of the mixed signals or the mixed data that we have with respect to the quality of some of those courses. And I don't mean to disparage community colleges, but for example, will you really have the rigor in a chemistry course in a community college that you need to become a chemical engineer at University of Texas or Texas A&M or any of their institutions? I don't know the answer to that question, and it's not really addressed in here, but I'm very concerned about that, the rigor that comes out of that. Now, it may be different for other courses, and I'm an engineer and I'm sensitive to that side of the equation, but it's not addressed in here about upping the ante on making sure that rigor is what we need.
Okay. All right. Hi.
Briefly as I can. Just looking at the general tone, it seems like we're going through and requiring a lot of things that, frankly, we should have already been doing. And I think maybe we need to insist that we have good, everybody will hate the term, but we need to have good managers at the universities, and if we don't, we need to make it easier for us to change that. Whether that's chancellors, whether that's presidents, whether that's provosts or CFOs. You know, most of these things that we're requiring, if you're a good manager, you're going to do anyway. I would much prefer to do it without a law or a rule. I would rather do it because that's what we should be doing. And if I don't do it, I would prefer to be fired and arrested.
Rescue.
Arrested. I also think that I just think that's part of what we need to be doing every single day. So the new university, the online, I agree that we have a whole bunch of universities who are already accredited who do a number of this thing. So perhaps the coordinating board could coordinate the ability of all of us to cross-list these courses. So we already have accreditation. It'd save you a bunch of steps and not having to go to the new idea. I just have a philosophical problem with, first off, I never call them incentives, because everybody needs to know that the incentive for higher education is internal. It is not external. I think it is a reward for doing your job exceedingly well, and that's the way I think we ought to talk about it, because it's not really an incentive. We already have the incentive. But I don't believe in giving rewards or incentives for intermediate steps. If we actually are going to fund, if that is our intent, to fund outcomes, it needs to be a final outcome, not just an intermediate outcome that sometimes leads to the final outcome that we want. In that regard, I'm talking about community college. If you complete an associate's degree in something that is not designed for that to be the terminal degree, if it goes on to 4, if it's a certificate, that's the end of it. I'm fine with that. But if it is, you're going to fund a graduate from a university, it seems to me that we should devise a program that funds that community college when their student graduates from a 4-year school, not on the intermediate step. Everybody says, well, we don't have any control over that. None of us do. But if we're going to talk about, universities don't have any control over whether or not their sophomore students go to be juniors either. So I just philosophically, if we're going to say that we're funding completers, and I'm not talking about course completers, I'm talking about the degree completers, then we should do that. Not do these intermediate steps. And I know that'll cause consternation among certain people, but if we're not going to do that, we need to not act like we are. We've heard that they're referred to by others as don't fund throughputs, fund outputs. Let's see, and again, I think the increase in semester credit hours per FTE and 2% that goes into fund, I just think it's got way past a point where a coordinating board or even a board of regents should be dealing with. I think that's a point where I shouldn't even have to deal with that. If I have presidents that don't deal with it, then we ought to have that conversation. But I don't think the legislature ought to be deciding whether or not I need to put 2% in my. They obviously can, by the way. In case anybody is listening, I'm not confused about who has certificates of election, but they've got a bunch bigger things to do than to worry about 2% and what the FTE per faculty member is, or what the semester credits per FTE is. Those are things that I worry about, but I would think that would not be beneficial for the state of Texas to spend much time worrying about that.
I agree. Brett, just generally, one of the things that has impressed me tremendously about the process are some of the conceptual things that were presented early on, and I think we need to look at the report in general to see if it's there. And it goes to what Woody said earlier, was affirmed by Scott, and that is the iron triangle. I don't know if you remember that mnemonic, but you have to have cost, quality, and access. And if you don't have a balance there, things are just not going to go right. And when you're talking about outputs, if you don't have the right amount of cost factor built in, the access built in, you may not have the quality that you're looking for. So I think that needs to be entered into the general tone of the document, simply because if this goes to the governor and also to the legislature, which it will, they need to understand that process, that balance that we looked at. The other concept was moving from a faculty-centric culture to a student-centric culture, looking at all of this in terms of how does it affect the student, and isn't that what we're there for anyway? The other thing is, we talked about productivity, and there were three things that are cautions that were issued at the very beginning of this process, and that was that there are barriers to productivity. One of them being opaque accounting conventions, which is data and all that good stuff. Problematic quality measurement. There was some in the report, but not specific to how we're going to measure all this, how we're going to determine. I think momentum points are an issue for community colleges, and we do need to have a discussion, and I'll get involved in that later in the small groups. And then the pursuit of prestige, that we sometimes behave in such a way that is detrimental to the students because of prestige, and maintaining certain cultural issues at certain institutions just because they've been there for years. So, there are some very specific things that I think are very, very important that needs to be more and more highlighted. I think course redesign, especially like for developmental ed and some of the other problematic courses, I think need to be looked at, because from what was presented, it was one of those issues that we can get into. It saves us a lot of money and upgrades the productivity and the outputs from the universities, and from the community colleges. And then again, something for the coordinating board to consider is that a lot of the experts that came before us talked about you're not going to get anything done unless you're persistent and you have flexibility. And I agree with some of you that said, don't micromanage this thing, have it so finite that there's no flexibility left for the institution. So those are just some of the things I'd like to share, and the more specific things that we'll get into as we get into the smaller group discussions.
Thank you, Roberto. We need to shift to the next thing, so Jesse, I'm going to go with you, and then I'll wrap this up so we can make a segue.
Well, I couldn't agree more with Mike about funding. Don't fund the mechanism. When we talk about funding, let's talk about the output. And another thing is, I don't know why we can't get off these percentages. They're tricky things. Just fund the output, because there are many programs that we can increase the percentages of, and if we have low numbers already, and you increase it by 2 or 3 students, percentages I can't make them work. But I really do like the idea of funding outputs. Don't fund the mechanism. Specific to Scott, and I'm getting way too specific here, we'll handle this in our breakout group. We need to deal with requiring at least 10% of each student. We're going to get a lot of pushback on that, because we're messing with pedagogy when you do that. You could do that by university. Requires even a higher percentage of the credit hours produced by our university or so forth be done with different methodology, and I think we could gear it to a university. It'll work and it'll sell. And number 5 on our worksheet is the end of the freshman year. That's a little nebulous. We ought to do it by the end of the 45th hour or something like that. The NCAA, by the way, is way ahead of us on this. To be eligible, after 60 hours, you file a degree plan, and every student has to take everything on that degree plan to qualify. It really is very helpful. But I think we need to look at specifically those pathways by modifying them. And by the way, our wording on performance incentives it says improve graduates. We really mean improve the number of graduates. That was very specific. I'm sorry.
Be careful, you may end up on the drafting team.
Thank you.
All right.
Oh, by the way, it's good.
A lot of the comments that were emailed have been shared with you, copies of letters and emails. And
Fred, I think Lori had.
I'll make it very quick, I promise.
Go ahead, Lori.
Just a couple of things. First, thank you for allowing me to be a part of this process. As a faculty member, it's been most enlightening. And inclusion is always important, and I applaud you for letting me be here, by the way. So I preface my statement.
Would have been nearly as fun without you.
First thing I'd like to say is that I feel I'm the conscience of the committee, and so I think that the elephant in the room that we haven't talked about is how our recommendations will affect the changing demographics in the state. When you start talking about dual credit and advanced placement and that kind of thing, in my experience, I found that most minority students do not take advantage of those things that are offered to them. And so the question would become, how are we going to get them involved in these things that are offered and they're not taking advantage of? As a member of another task force with the coordinating board, the Accelerated Action Plan for Latino and African American Males, I don't think we're taking that into consideration. And I'm waiting to be convinced by you and the commissioner about the priority model. But how is that going to affect that group of students? And I think we need to address that as a state board, because it's going to be crucial in terms of the success of the state. So that's the first thing. Second thing is faculty already feel under assault. We're speaking about issues now as it affects faculty. Right now we're getting ready to post our syllabi. I don't have a problem with that, and most faculty will not have a problem with that, but there are a number of things that we're having to do that are going to be different this year. Yet another recommendation that seems to micromanage what it is that we do in the classroom and that kind of thing. I think you're going to get a lot of pushback from that as well. And then finally, the freshman plan at the end of the freshman year, I just think that's la-la land. I know that I have juniors and seniors who are still trying to get into our program, and we're trying to address that at our university. We're coming up with an entire center that will advise freshmen and give them their idea of what professions are, so that they come away with this kind of plan at the end of their freshman year. But I just don't think that's possible. Our advisors are already inundated to say that an advisor will need to step in when they start taking a course that's not in their plan. I just think that's just not going to be feasible. And I want us to understand that there are a lot of things that are going to be required when we recommend these kinds of things that I don't think will be realistic on the college level, college university level. So that's what I have to say.
Thank you for everybody's comments. I did have a phone conversation without an email from David Engel, whose comments were basically, I can remember 2 of 3 anyway, basically much like Woody's, in that the tone, in his opinion, the tone of the document was not urgent enough, was not, he wanted to see it, we talked about successes of closing the gap, and he was looking forward to, what are we doing to become not only more cost efficient but globally competitive. And then the second thing, which I briefly alluded to, is he thought we needed a lot more, the report would be enhanced with specific examples. And I want to assure y'all that the staff is researching both estimating economic impact and also specific examples from Maryland, Ohio, other states that we've heard testimony and example programs from, so that we can illustrate these not just with ideas but with benchmarks or metrics. So that will be a process that takes a little time to add to this report, but it will happen. The last comment I'll make is that many of you commented on specific recommendations, which we fully expected, but if we literally took everyone's comments to heart and everybody's concerns and eliminated those, we'd have about a page and a half left. Right. So we've got to remind ourselves that despite our healthy skepticism from our different approaches and backgrounds, we cannot afford to do business as usual. This committee, I wish we were doing this 2 years ago, because the urgency that y'all are feeling, of course, is now as we approach this impending budget deficit. And we do understand that. So we will, in our small groups, try to find that right balance between not micromanaging campuses and universities, which is certainly not our goal, at the same time recognizing that human nature and the urgency of the present have impeded academic institutions from making necessary change. And where is that right balance? So hopefully with the collective wisdom of this group, we'll be at least 80% right. So having said that, I'm going to turn it over to Patty to lead us into our next session.
Okay, we're 20 minutes late. Now, bad news is I planned for 210 minutes for us in this discussion. However, I scaled it down to 160 minutes knowing that we would lose time. So we're actually almost on time. Does that make sense? Yes. That's a cost efficiency thing. Okay, here's the first thing. There's two handouts I really want you to have in front of you. One is the handout that has Han, Texas on the bottom. It starts off with work process. Those are going to be our worksheets today. And the other one is the impact estimates of the report. And this is the shorter of the two reports, not the long one, but the shorter one that has the actions and the cost estimates. So those are the two we're going to work from. And the first thing I want you to do, because you will be handing this one that says Hahn, Texas on the bottom, you'll be handing this in before you leave. You'll be recording your answers here. So at the top, if you will check if you're a board member, if you're part of the private sector advisory committee member or higher ed, and you may be two of those. So if you're both a board member and part of the private sector, if you just check both of those, that'd be great. But just on the first page, if you would go ahead and do that. The reason being is that we will, as you record your answers here, I want to be able to separate between academicians, private sector, and board member opinions. We'll dice it different ways for you. So that's first thing. Second thing is that...
I'm not any of those. I'm not an academician. I resent being called no way.
Why do you do this to me? I'm so nice to you. I'm so nice to you.
So live with it.
There's a few of us like that.
Okay. What you just started out, that feedback was excellent, and you will have an opportunity to give more specific feedback than that even. But we can't get so granular that we're down in the weeds. We have a very limited amount of time. So I'm going to try to adhere to our time limits. The bad news is I forgot my big bell, and I got this little dinky thing. So you're going to have to listen for that. The way we're going to do this, first of all, the big ideas, which you've already given some feedback on. We're going to go through those. The second is we're going to go through each of the big ideas, the short-term actions. And we're going to rate those. There's 4 questions you're going to answer on each one of them. The first is a rating. Accurate. Is this an accurate reflection of the discussions? You'll look at that specific short-term action. Should it be included as an action item? That's the second one. You're rating from 1 to 5. And I believe 5 is disagree or agree? Strongly agree. 5 is strongly agree. 1 is strongly disagree. And then, is there something major we should add to this particular action or this particular big idea? And do you have any other comments? Your small groups will not be back at the tables because we're so limited on time. And what I'm going to ask you to do is group yourselves into 4 or 5, probably 4 people around the tables. And I'm sure y'all can do that. Okay, go to page 4 on this handout, on the Hahn, Texas handout. Parameters. We're focusing on the content of the report. You may think that we're here to come to consensus. You're here to give feedback on the report, and perhaps we're here to register your dissension on any of those items as opposed to consensus. But because of the time limits, we're gathering information, we're taking notes. Those will all be reviewed and reported in the final documentation preparation. As we go through the sections, each one of you will individually complete the worksheet on that particular section. I'll ring a little bell. You'll have a little small group discussion. And then after the small group discussion, and there'll be a different time limit on each one of these, I just need the major points there. As I said, you have the opportunity to write down information in here for me. Okay? Any questions?
Patty,
yes, sir?
Have we got the groups somewhat already laid out in terms of the small groups, or do we need to...
I saw that they were counting off here, they were having trouble. So from Brenda to Rick?
Elmo, actually.
Well, we can go...
Elmo to Scott? Well, you know what?
Why don't we go
Stop
for
at
me?
Elmo, and then it's 4 here, and then 4 there.
Yeah.
There you go. Or 5 here, right?
No, we can pick up Richard.
Okay, Rich.
Our first decision. We can't.
You're always in the middle. And so we have 3 groups. That's even better. That's great. Are we organized now?
Well, You got a group over here that's quote-unquote all private sector business, a group that's 100% academic. So,
do you think that matters at this point or not? You do? Okay, who's going to switch?
Who's what now?
Well, he's saying we've got private sector, and who needs to switch then? Let's look from Brenda to Rick. Who needs to leave that group? We've got private sector, private sector, private sector.
I'll tell you what. Where do you want me? Let's have Woody and Rick meet with Scott and Laurie. Is that all right with you guys? Sure. Okay. Brenda and Bernie pair with Elmo and Roberto. Is that fair?
Sounds good.
And again, where's Rich going to go? Because he can go to this group.
Then we've got. I need to join the group. You been participating in the group?
No.
Okay. Let's see. Who does that leave us? That's 2 groups of 4. We were supposed to have 16, which would have made this easy, but we don't. Mm-hmm. Maybe what we ought to do is have Rich and Ray and Ben be a group, and then myself, Jesse, and Mike be a group.
Great.
That work?
Yeah. And all you're going to do is just group up when we get to discussion. Got it? You want to move now?
I'll just come over there with you guys.
We have to do these individually first, is that what you said? Or are we on first?
We're going to go to page 5.
You have to put up with Bernie? How are you doing, man? Doing great. How you doing?
In these worksheets, which I did not get a chance to look at, they are already divided by the 5 big ideas.
Yes. First of all, go to page 5.
Page 5.
Page 5 on the Han Texas handout. All right, this is the first worksheet, and this is on the big ideas. We have 15 minutes or less on this, and obviously you've already read the report, so we don't have to spend those 5 minutes. Committee's ideas fell naturally into these 5 overarching big ideas. 4 questions. This is the only one that the questions are different on. Overall, the report captures the essence of the topics and ideas brought forth in our monthly meetings. All you have to do is circle a rating, 1 to 5. Then you rate the second one. They're accurately characterized. And then answer 3 and 4, and you have 5 minutes. Actually, you have 7 minutes to do that individually and discuss in your group, and then I'm going to ask you to report back the highlights. Whoever screams the loudest.
Brenda, what's the ladies' number? I guess we can get started. Okay. Overall.
In terms of question, do you have an average on that first one? The report captures the essence of the topics.
Yeah, I had about a 4.
Out of 4, what'd you guys have? 4? 4. Average kind of 4. All right, good.
4.33.
4. Oh, I knew you shouldn't have joined that group. And the 5 big ideas. Question 2, resulting from our monthly meetings are accurately characterized. What's your average there?
Okay.
4? 4?
4.33.
Y'all are copying.
Oh, cooking.
Okay, if not, third question. If not, what is missing, or what would you add? We'll just go in order.
I just have a recommendation to restate on funding results, not activity or good intentions. I mean, it needs to be more professional, I think, and more indicative of the committee's work. Outputs, something.
Okay. How about the second group? Anything dramatic? Nothing?
The only comment I had that I didn't make here, I thought we had a much more discussion about mission-driven values for the system driving the allocation of resources that didn't really make it into the report.
Okay.
It's a bigger deal. And I think system and campus responsibilities, system and campus leadership responsibilities are, there's this material in here that I don't think was discussed. Or let's say a direction that wasn't discussed. That puts it more burden on the state, the legislature, the government. It really comes home here.
Okay, y'all pull those microphones closer to you when you're talking so we make sure we get it recorded. And you guys have no microphones. What am I going to do? Talk louder. Okay. And you guys, over here.
Just on item number 3, what's
Yes.
missing or what would you add? I'd say that one of the more major ideas that came out during our meetings that wasn't in the report was reviewing the purpose, and this is my wording, Mike, so you jump in, review the purpose and efficacy of tuition exemptions and waivers for out-of-state and international students.
Okay.
Are we giving up revenue? Shouldn't be doing that.
Right.
Right.
Okay, and last question, 4. Anything you believe is misrepresented at all? No.
No.
I don't trust these guys. Why is it every group Roberto is in, there's a problem? I don't understand.
What do you mean it's a problem?
Anything over
So much for input, right?
Anything over here?
We didn't have misrepresentations. There were 2 suggested modifications, so perhaps these should be saved for the topics. But one was Jesse in particular strongly felt that the 10% off-campus requirement should be modified from each student to the overall credit hours of the institution, being measured at that institutional or campus level.
Okay.
And then the other was on the declaration of degree plan at the end of the freshman year, that should be a specific number of hours. And we're saying 30 hours, but there was some discussion and debate about the number of hours.
Okay. Everybody hear that?
Patty,
Those
I had-
were modifications.
Yeah.
I had a comment, and I don't know if it goes in 3 or 4, but that we need to find the balance between micro-legislating and encouraging a cultural shift to accommodate efficiency.
Okay. Great. All right. See how easy that was? Going to page 6. We are talking about funding results, short-term actions. So you're going to rate each one of those, and there are 3 short-term actions. The number, the P3 you see here refers back to the impact estimates in case you wanted to look at the numbers as well. So answer on page 6 and 7, answer all of those questions individually and then discuss. You have 10 minutes to do that. Then I'll call you back together. Time. Any group need any more time? Excellent. Okay, we're going to do the same process. I'm going to give the numbers first for each one. Funding formulas for 2-year and 4-year institutions. What was your average on accurate reflection of our discussions? Everybody circle a number?
Give it a 5.
I give it a 3.
I
think it averages out to about 4.
4. What about you guys?
The accuracy
4.33.
4 or 5.
4 or 5?
What about
4.33.
That's the only one that I can do.
Yeah, okay.
So we're about a 4 on
5.
average.
Oh, a 5. Holy
Guys,
cow.
4.
And should this be included as an action? What was your average?
4 here.
4? 4?
About a 4.
3, average.
4.67.
Okay. Please elaborate, if appropriate. Any comments on this very one? This very first one. Funding formulas for 2- and 4-year institutions should be modified. Roberto, talk to me.
Momentum points and the funding for community colleges. I think it's very important to understand that the momentum points presented is an incentive on top of the base formula, and that needs to be preserved. Also, we discuss an at-risk future, especially for community colleges, in that we deal with the most at-risk population in the state. And Ohio, I think, is developing a model that we should look at, and I think we need to keep that feature in mind as we go forward with the recommendation.
Okay. Any other comments from Mr. Bernie?
Roberta and I got kind of out of whack a little bit, but he sees great value. I don't want to put words in his mouth. He sees good value in open enrollment and will complete with its failure rate. And so I was just asking. I don't see it. I mean, it seems to be that a student should be college ready coming into the community college system as well. So
we might have a little bit of a difference there.
Okay. Scott?
It's sort of a disagreement, but more, I think, in terms of implementation. I think we all felt, and they speak for themselves, strongly on sort of outcomes-based. We understand the merit of that. My thought is, I don't know that implementing that through changing in the formula is the best way. For me, the more elegant approach is to use the incentive, which is the question in the next. I think with it is challenging to understand how you would move into formulas today, outcomes that you're looking for in terms of at least the way the report was written, degrees awarded, 4- and 6-year graduation rates, et cetera, how campuses could be able to plan and create some stability. So, one thought would be to have a formula pool with maybe a little bit more stability, but to use the performance incentive piece to incent or to reward outcomes.
Okay. All right. Raymond, on 4.33 group, do y'all have any comments? This is on number 1.
I just, for two-year college with open access and no selectivity, and then disengaging your cost drivers from this portion of the funding, that's scary. It really is saying you must do this. You have no control over inputs, and yet you're held totally accountable no matter where that student is when they show up.
Okay.
I just want to throw that out there. I don't mind being held accountable or any of that, but you are disengaging the cost drivers from a portion of the funding. If you're talking, selectivity, you can get 100% graduation rate. It's easy. But the less selective, then we're pretending that it's not so. Also on transfers, that's sort of the primary reason community college was created. Was for transfers, take the burden off 4-year schools. So that's the first thing it would seem you would want to consider in the formula. The next one's the workforce certificates, whatever. A distant third would be associate's degrees. Really.
Okay. Last group. Any comments?
I think this. Well, we got 5 on this. Did we?
Yeah.
Yes, you did. You had a 5.
But you had a comment about the use of
I don't think, in my mind.
Let's get that.
Okay.
Yeah, let's get that closer.
Our intent was never to remove the cost drivers from our funding. We need to keep cost drivers as part, or the matrix as part of funding, but to make the incentive a real incentive, we have it pretty much right now. If we could move to, say, 25% of total funding that goes to any one institution is based on graduates, and 75% goes through the formula matrix is based on cost drivers. That's what I never thought we would move all funding to outcomes. That won't work. Okay, right. Okay, but it's got to be large enough to make it a real incentive. Now, I think we're well on the way to doing that now with the formulas. I think we should keep it up. Let's base it on number of graduates. I really recommend that we weight it based on STEM and high demand. I think that needs to be increased, not just STEM fields, but secondary teachers and nursing students. Okay. But anyway, all right.
Can I ask you a question? Are you looking at just 1 or 2?
I was just looking at 1. We're going to do 2 right now.
Yeah, and it just basically got to fund the base first.
That's right. I agree with you.
Fund the base
Before we do
first.
any of the rest of it.
But again, it's important. I never thought we were saying move our funding totally to outcomes. Okay, I think it needs to be as it is now. They'll have 100% funding, maybe, I don't know what the percentage is, 75% cost drivers to run the place. That's that base that Mike's talking about. And then 25% incentive based on the number of graduates we produce. Is that what?
Okay, this is excellent feedback. You really do have to speak in the microphone. We're on the internet. Dennis is also listening in, and this recording will be used to make sure we've got the proper notes. So please get close to that microphone. All right, number 2, continue to fund the performance incentive funding initiatives. What was your average here?
Mine a 5. Just got a 4.
Kind of 4 or 5?
About a 4 or 5, 4 and a quarter. 3. Yes, we're averaging 4. Averaging 4.
4.6.
Okay, tell you what, let's do. If it's 3 or under, you'll report it. If it's 4 or 5, don't, because it looks like with our groups, they're kind of going 4 or 5. So let's look for those things that don't fit. It should be included as a short-term action. Anybody have an average in your group of 3 or below? No? All right. Let's talk about this one. Any comments? Bernie and Roberto and Brenda, your group, any comments?
Bernie, Roberto, and myself were on the incentive funding task force in 2008, and it was only about 1%. So I think the real key issue, once again, is, and it was weighted to critical fields, it was weighted to at-risk students, but we were only spending essentially 1% of the formula dollars that could have been in the formula were allocated on that basis. So to me, if you put 1 and 2 together, the real issue is how many dollars does it take to maximize the market impact on behavior. And I don't know whether that number is 5 or 25. It's certainly probably somewhat less than 100%. But to me, you combine the 2 together and you try to focus on how many dollars need to be infrastructure dollars and how many need to be incentives. It was tied to total number of degrees, half, and then increase in degrees was the other half of the funding. And so it's those kind of issues to work your way through.
Okay, great feedback. Raymond or Ben, Rich, anything in y'all's group you want to comment on? Nothing? Get out of here. Okay, well, let's go to number 3. Allocate major state financial aid dollars to financially needy students. Is this an accurate reflection of our discussions? 3 or below? Average of 3 or below? 3 or below, anybody?
Well, we have the average, but
you're on the other side.
Ben had it down at 2.
Okay. And that's exactly what I want. That's why I want you to circle your individual answers so I can get a range as opposed to an average, which often doesn't tell us very much. Okay, should this be included as a short-term action? Any group have kind of an average of 3 or below? So if you 3 or below, I'm sure you've got some ranges down there.
Yeah, we go from 2 to 4.
Okay. Hey, maybe that's a better idea. Why don't we just do ranges as opposed to average? That's good. All right. Let's have any discussion on this. Reallocating major state financial aid dollars. Your group have anything, Roberta? You haven't discussed that one?
Page 7?
Yeah. Number 3. Did the rest of y'all do it?
Yep.
Yeah.
See, I told you.
I said we. I didn't say I. First person, but I do have some input if you want.
I have some input.
Give me some input on it.
Okay. I guess the only choice, what you're kind of saying at less than 4 is contrary to what we're here to do, and that we don't want to fund inefficiency. And so to me, this is the nut of why we're here. If it's predictable that students who worked hard in high school are most likely to succeed, why not move them to the front of the line?
I need a better definition of what major state financial aid dollars might mean, because
Texas grants.
Just Texas grants is all we're talking about.
Well, that's where the coordinating board legislative recommendation focuses.
Okay, as long as the recommendation doesn't go into other types of financial aid programs.
There's another concept, too, that I don't know how this works, but I think that, let's say a student, and this could be an incentive, but students complete at community colleges, they should become eligible for any state grants available because they already are successful, they have got proven track record, and it may be more efficient the use of those funds.
Okay.
Doesn't help with a sticker shock. It really does.
Oh, and look, Lori is teeing this thing up. I bet you've got something to say. Yes, ma'am.
Absolutely, because I'm the only one with the two on the second part. I guess that's the fundamental difference we have here. I'm not a business person. I'm someone who deals with the students on a daily basis, and by choice. And I guess my question is, and I heard Bernie say that earlier, from a financial or businessman point of view, this is not cost efficient. What's the alternative? Not every student is a good student. We have a lot of students that are C students. What's the alternative? Do nothing with them, or and a majority of my students are good at something or another, but they're not all great students. So what is the alternative? And I'm very passionate about that. So. Yes, sir. Convince me, Fred.
Because this is the one recommendation where for those who may not be familiar with the specific priority model that the commissioners recommended, let me add a couple of specifics, because this is the one that probably surprises me the most, that there's disagreement. First of all, if we had 100% student financial aid sufficient enough for 100% of the needy students, you'd be dead on right. I think we'd all be in agreement. The reason for prioritizing this is because we don't have 100% financial aid. So please bear in mind that the recommendation, I don't know if this changes anyone's opinion or ranking or what have you, but the intent is, number one, there's no change in the definition of need. We're still talking about the neediest students. Number two, there's no change in the allocation of the Texas grants to institutions. So there's no winners and losers. We're not taking from one institution and giving more to another. And number three, all it does is allow those students who meet 2 out of 4 proposed merit criteria to go to the front of the line and be awarded those grants, because statistics show that those students who are more prepared for college, using, I think it was the 2003 cohort, Raymond, literally doubled their graduation rate from slightly under 30% to slightly over 60%, their completion rate. And so that's what, Laurie, when we get at that term, efficient use of our student financial aid dollars, that's our intent.
I know. I'd like to answer her question. I'm glad she's over there and I'm over here, because I'm sure she would be tempted to slap me upside the head here. But
well, she can always get up and walk over.
The answer is, Lori, the answer, as I see it, is additional funding for higher quality student guidance counseling.
Well, I'm not sure if you're finished.
I'm finished.
Okay. I understand the rest of what you were saying, Fred, but my question is, what percentage of those who got the Texas grant this year will not get it as a result of next year? An A or B student, in my estimation, will get scholarships. That student is the one we're trying to get. We have any number of minority males who are A and B students. They are, overloaded with scholarships in some instances, so there are scholarships that are available. But for that C student, there aren't scholarships out there. So and I saw Raymond come over in my periphery, so I knew he was coming to. I just feel passionate that, and I'm not just talking about minority students. I've got a lot of C students. I teach at least 500 students per semester, and the vast majority are not A and B students. And most of those would not have the opportunity to go to college were it not for the Texas grants. If they're going to be pushed to the back of the line, they may not get that opportunity, whereas the academically high-functioning students they're going to make it anyway in most instances.
Lori, are they college ready if they're C students? That's what I'm.
Yes, I think that I'm an A student. I'm one of the ones who but I think it's incumbent upon us to realize that if we're talking about closing the gaps, if we're talking about serving the population that is the vast majority of the state, that we're talking about making sure that money that goes to them remains available. I mean, Bernie and I have had this discussion. He told me I was too passionate about those who were not ready. And perhaps that's true. But somebody needs to be.
I think you should be passionate about it. But I think the question here is where should the aid go? Should we put our aid
are meeting and working hard. That doesn't address the global issue.
Right.
The global issue is we have to start well before they apply to get into college.
You're right.
We are not doing the right things. We, the state, communities, families, in the junior high and in the high school level.
Absolutely right.
So I applaud your passion, but we need to be directing efforts to students long before they get in here. When they come to college, those decisions really need to be efficient in how we allocate those dollars.
An example of that, and we're not recommending it, the report doesn't currently have it as a short-term recommendation. Perhaps it could be a long-term consideration, but an example of what you're talking about is what are variously referred to as early promise programs.
That's exactly right.
Which match the work, the promise of the student to work hard and achieve results with the promise of a grant at the end of that achievement.
And that was one of my statements, Patty. Also, under any other comments, is where did the promise program idea go to? So I think it's a very valid idea in terms of trying to motivate students into getting college ready.
Yeah, as I said earlier, Roberta, that was one of two frequently discussed, interim ideas that weren't in the report. I don't think in the reason that I personally, this is just my opinion, don't see it as a short-term recommendation is just because of the budget environment we can expect. Perhaps that's something that should be part of our long-term investment study that we've recommended.
I'm a legislator, that might not be a bad idea to look at and try to see if they can find some funding. I think it's a worthwhile endeavor.
Fred, and to me, we can implement, you can implement today with students in the 7th or 8th grade in anticipation of what's coming. It still gives you 4 years, 6 years to be able to structure the funding. And because, for us to begin to implement, we really have to start with those students, early on. And so, that's the only issue that I would say is that while it's a long-term financial issue, and you've got to certainly gauge, investments, et cetera, I think the longer we put that off, then more difficult.
Scott, there's another feature too built into this that I really like, and that is it puts the parents on alert as well. They're going to send their child to college, and so they've got to start acting like they've got to save money and get ready for that event when it comes because of that contract that they've signed.
Okay. Commissioner, did you have?
Yes, I wanted to respond to a couple of things that Lori said. First of all, the highest achieving students do get access to substantial levels of support. We're talking about B students. There is not a lot of money for B students, and remember that the merit criterion in terms of grade point average that we've recommended is a B average. In fact, the average high school GPA is about a B, so we're really talking about average students. Secondly, the poor students will always get Pell Grants because, as you know, the Pell Grant doesn't have any merit criteria attached to it at all. It's also interesting to me that it seems like there's an emerging consensus around the concept of funding on outputs or incentive funding done in different configurations. Maybe the threshold that changes institutional behavior is 10%, 20%, 30%, whatever it is. But notice that there's a lot of agreement around the idea of incentivizing institutions to do well. We don't have any incentives for students to do well. We need to send a message to students in high school. We expect you to work as hard as you can. And right now what we have is a lottery system where you could be a very high-performing student, and because you don't show up to financial aid office in time, you don't get an award. You're an A student. You don't get an award, and a C student does. To me, that system, it sends exactly the wrong message to young people. But once again, we put in safeguards in the proposal that would ensure that institutions get the same allocations. Institutions that enroll a large number of students who are at risk by any variety of definitions will get the same amount of money. And if we put into place incentive funding for institutions, then those institutions will have an incentive to help those students succeed, which is something else we currently don't have. But we need to have a partnership between the institutions and the students, that we're all going to work as hard as we can to produce the results that we need to be nationally and internationally competitive. So the two go together.
I was worried this was going to be a boring and impassionate meeting, but one last piece, Laurie, and for others that are concerned about this, and I know this doesn't represent the total gap or concern you have, but we have in our LAR recommended that students who qualify for a top 10% scholarship don't get a Texas grant. In other words, they can't stack those; they get one or the other. And that actually, the numbers show that would free up funding for another 3,500 students in that bucket. So that's another small building block in that recommendation, so to speak.
Does anybody have anything quickly to add to this discussion on the funding results? Bernie?
This is really picky, but I was confused about what are we doing about the academically superior students. So if we're referring to Texas grants in the document, we ought to mention Texas grants as opposed to this general statement here.
That's what I'm writing that down right now.
All right. Between now and, yes, sir.
The only thing that I think is missing out of that is speaking to community college transfers, because of the way that it's allocated to the universities. You know, we get allocated based on what it is we got last year. And the first ones in line at this point in time are those who got it last year. And if they were at a community college and they transferred, they're at the very, very back of the line. And that is, in fact, the ones who maybe didn't qualify academically to the beginning, but they've got 60 hours. Somehow or another, we've got to look at the distribution on the Texas grants for community college transfers.
Thank you, Mike.
Okay, between now and lunch, we're going to finish this next section, creating clear pathways, and here are the parameters. I don't care if it takes you to 12:30. We're still coming back at 1. So that we can finish. How's that? All right. So there's 5 short-term actions. This is starting on page 8, and it goes through Roberto. It goes through page 10. Is this Arizona? That hurt me so bad. I can't even believe you said that. Pages 8 through 10. So take 10 minutes, maybe 12. I'll give you 12 minutes to write your answers down, discuss as a group, and when you come back, you're going to give me the range for each one of these that you have.
1 through 5. I do have 5 we're looking at present. Does it affect?
Let's get this clarified.
What type of institutions does it affect?
I think that's for you guys to decide. I think there are differences that you were talking about. It's clearly
right.
The articulation agreements. The major issue there is the community colleges to the 4-year institutions.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with the same issues.
What about nursing?
Well, there are huge issues in nursing. There's probably more variation in the curriculum of nursing I've been told than virtually anything else. So I'm not sure. I personally am not sure how that fits with the health science. I'm over no better.
I affect this question is nursing.
I don't understand the 80% rule. I don't know where that
We ask for clarity. It needs to be clarified.
Okay, that's the feedback.
I think that's the overarching comment that we're hearing is we need to be more specific about how we identify the exceptions to the rule.
Now, see, the admission process in the health science center is like in the case of nursing, and so, hey, you guys jump in now, Chancellor. I'm waiting. Help me. But the admission process is such that we have X number of slots that we have available for each of our disciplines in the health science center, and you have obviously many, many more applicants for each of those slots. And so I don't know about an articulation agreement that might be signed years in advance that all of a sudden guarantees
guaranteed admission anywhere, if that's your question.
Well, we
can not mean that at all.
Okay. Well, my real question is, do these 5 recommendations apply to the health-related institutions, or is it just general academics and community colleges?
I think the answer I'm hearing is that if you'll write that comment down, that's the clarification that we need to make. Does anybody have an opinion?
Well, I thought that's what this group was supposed to do.
Well,
I have to answer that one at a time.
Well, I actually think there's maybe this should have come way back at the beginning on talking about big issues, because in all fairness, Texas is essentially the only place that has this health science center set up, and they have a totally separate program, totally separate formulas, and all of that. The truth is that health science centers teach nursing, and we have academic universities that teach nursing, and they're funded differently, totally different formulas. I mean, everything. We have academic centers that have pharmacy schools, and we have health science centers that have pharmacy schools. We have the same thing for what, there's got to be others on this. Allied health sciences. Other allied health. My own opinion is that this is a residual of old politics and old way of doing things. And I think that we have to sit down and talk again about funding, again, what it is we're turning out, and not funding the processes so much. If I'm learning to be a nurse from a health science center, or I'm learning to be a nurse at UT Austin, I don't know that we can continue to justify the difference. I've said before, I would like to have a college of medicine that I already have. I would like for it to be part of the academic university. It doesn't have anything to do with the turnout doctors. It has to do with the faculty I'm eligible to recruit. So I mean, or able to recruit. So I think there is a great big discussion to be had on fairness and funding on health-related programs, not institutions, but health-related programs. But our formula funding in the state of Texas does not really fund individual programs. You know, we have pots of money, one pot of money for general academic institutions, one pot of money for community colleges, and a third pot for the health-related. The respective formulas, and each of them have their own formula allocation, allocates that pot of money to the institutions, for example, to all the general academics in the state. All right? So the formulas are really a methodology used to allocate money between institutions. Has nothing to do really with the disciplines. I mean, you can come down and look at A plus B should equal C, but it doesn't. I don't know of an institution in the state that then takes those formula funding dollars when they're writing their operating budget, and whatever history generates, that's the history department's budget.
Let me clarify one thing. That the formula for universities and community colleges actually considers programs in which students are enrolled, but it isn't. But the next step is exactly right. It isn't used as a budgeting advice. So you don't necessarily see the money generated by electrical engineering being budgeted for electrical engineering.
It just doesn't happen. No, but I tell them. I'm telling you, they will know. It's going to be very interesting, because our people are going to know. Liberal arts is going to be very surprised how much money they contribute to the university. Everybody thinks liberal arts doesn't carry their weight. Liberal arts pays their weight plus half the other university. I mean, it's just a strange deal. What my point is that in this, maybe, I mean, you've heard me say before, I think we should have an education agency, period. Community colleges, four-year colleges, medical schools, kindergartens, whatever. And then we keep going back to the silo, and what we're doing is we're having the political fight up here on how much money goes into the silos that only applies to then the people who are in the chosen silo. Again, I go to the nursing school at UT Austin. UT Austin has a very good nursing school. They are funded significantly less than the University of Texas Health Science Center in Houston Nursing School, which is also very good. I just think, again, as a taxpayer, we would expect that there would be some level of fairness in all of this. And I think there's not a level of fairness in having, when we set up, if education is a continuum, and we just make artificial divisions on here. If we say health-related institutions, again, we're not funding the students, we're funding the institutions. And we talked about that earlier. We need to, put the emphasis back on the students and not on the institutions. So that's just my bias.
70% of nurses in San Antonio are coming out of community colleges. And we don't get funded at any of those levels you're talking about.
Right.
Nowhere near. We're more efficient.
And we're not even in the discussion with the health science. So
No, that's good. Anybody else?
one add-on to what the chancellor said, though, is that when you talk about the formulas and you talk about how much nursing would generate in each type institution, that's not the cost of nursing education there, because that formula covers everything we do in the health science centers except for our research and our physical plant operations. So when we talk about a formula generation per student based on semester credit hour production, we're talking about funding not just the education, we're talking about all the administration, the library, student services, everything we do, with the exception, as I said, research and physical plant. And you've got fewer students in health science centers is the issue.
And that's one of the things I think we got too many chancellors and we got too many presidents. Just think, that's an opportunity. That's an opportunity to take university and put it under an existing academic center.
I missed y'all so much.
Could I see, I thought Ken Hance was going to be here. I've been working on my lines, and he's just done.
Are we getting the information that you need, Fred, David, you need?
Well, I think we're struggling to answer Elmo's question, which is what do 1 through 5 apply to the health-related institutions? And there's really two different levels I can answer that on. One is, what percentage of our state students are in health-related institutions?
Very small.
Small percentage.
Typical health science center is 2,500, 3,000 students.
Well, that's the follow-up question. But what can we have the greatest impact on in the short term as part of the discussion? So at that level, some of these, if not all of these, may not apply. Having said that, however, I don't think that the health-related institutions are supposed to get a pass go and collect your check, carte blanche card here. So as we go through these, I think we need to. You've asked a very pertinent question. We should consider: should any of these 5 pertain to health-related institutions now, or should we step back and over the next couple of years look at the much bigger picture that Mike raises about are we correctly structured with our health-related institutions?
It's a legislative decision there.
Which is not something we're going to solve today.
But again, it comes under the big picture part, and I don't mean to speak for Scott, but even at the University of Texas, I remember that the health-related institutions were probably 2/3 of the University of Texas system budget.
They are.
Yeah. So, for us to just kind of brush that off because this other one's easier doesn't mean it's. I just think we can't lose focus of it.
Okay.
Those are not the state funded dollars. Those are the practice plan earnings because of tremendous income generating.
Their whole budget is
right.
I just had a technical question because I had to change my scores.
Okay.
The question that we're not saying whether or not we agree with this idea. We're just whether we agree or not, whether this was a reflection of the discussion.
Well, it's.
You see what I'm saying?
Well, the first question is it an accurate reflection? But the second one, B, is should it be included as a short-term action in terms of the ratings? Correct?
Okay. But I was just when I read it, I thought, no, I don't agree with that. But I do agree that that's an accurate reflection of the discussion.
Okay. All right. You know what we're going to do? We've got 12 minutes. Let's try to get through this because at 12:20, I've been informed, your lunch will be set out and ready. So just on the first one, just give me a range on the 1A. Is it an accurate reflection of our discussions? This group? 4. 4 basically. This group?
4 to 5.
4 to 5. Ben, your group?
1 to 3.
1 to 3. Okay.
4 to 5.
Okay.
I
And
said 1 to 3 because we questioned where the 80% came from.
okay.
Well,
Yeah, we did too.
I think everybody has that same question. I wouldn't knock it down to a 1 to 3. Man, you guys don't grade on the curve at all. But I think that's the common theme from all the groups is we got to be more specific.
So if you want to change it, you can. And should it be included as a short-term action? Just on one. What's our range over here? 4. 4s?
4.5.
Okay.
3 to 5.
3 to 5.
Is that what you want? 2 to 5.
2 to 5.
We have an outlier.
Okay. Is there, I wonder who that could be. Is there, why don't we just put Mike and Roberto?
Actually, you said on the wrong side.
That's what I told him to begin with.
I knew Elmo was going to be fired up, so I said over here.
I'm not fired up.
We have a statistical outlier. It's really 1 to 4.
1 to 4. Okay. All right. Any more discussion on number 1? Anybody have anything they need to say on number 1 additionally?
I need to see it, but I shouldn't. We've been talking about articulation agreements for the 40 years I've been in administration. The problem is no one pays any attention to them. If we're not careful here, we can do a lot of busy work and it won't gain anything. That's the reason the 80%, a study of the 80% is critical. It will narrow this down to something that we could grasp better than just 80%. It might actually be doable.
Okay.
Sorry. We could tell you if you want exactly what we're doing with Lumina for the next 4 years. That would be helpful because we actually have identified programs that we were planning on doing regardless of this. Okay, we could do that.
We'll do it whether it's by appendix or
That's
however.
on a voluntary
We'll add that
basis.
specifics.
Brenda, you had a comment?
Yeah, it says legislation should be enacted. Why does this have to be legislatively driven? Is there another way to drive this?
That's a good point.
For that reason, I have to tell you, I scored it low.
I think the reason it was on the legislative recommendations is not because that's the only path, but because that would be the quickest, surest path.
I don't agree with that. And then also, my other comments are more data and understanding of unintended consequences, etc.
Okay. How about number 2? 10% of each student's degree or certificate program be completed in ways not requiring on-campus instruction. I can't imagine y'all would have an opinion about this.
Yeah.
That would differ. Let's go directly to, should this be included as a short-term action?
I've got a 7.
7? He's making up his own scale.
I've got 5. What do you guys have? 4 or 5.
And I got a comment. This is being done by community colleges, that's all I was going to say. It's being done by community colleges. I do have a problem with certificate programs. Most of our certificate programs require labs and
They're so short.
on-hand experience. So I don't know if that can be done outside of the academic setting on campus.
Okay.
Brenda went rogue on us over here with a 1.
Well, she's being recalcitrant today.
You know, you go from the coordinating board to the UT board, and look what happened.
Liz, do you want to make a comment?
Well, I haven't seen enough data on this point to be supportive, but also when you use the words require and each student, that really concerns me.
I think that Jesse made a good clarification. This actually came up when we were talking overall, but this is the right place for it to go. And that is, I think the key problem there, well, I mean, if you don't require it, you can't really expect it to happen statewide. But number 2, I think it's each student that is the issue here. The big picture really would be each university or each campus with their overall number of credit hours. And that was a clarifying comment that Jesse made earlier that I think has a lot of validity.
Yeah, to me, it gets back to general discussion points that we've made throughout the course of this committee, but I think giving incentives to the campuses can fulfill some of the objectives we're trying to get to. But when you talk about require statewide, that concerns me for a multitude of reasons.
Even if it's at the campus or institutional level?
I think if you give the campuses the goals, the incentives, and let them, with their knowledge and experience and creativity, come up with the throughputs, the mechanism for achieving the goals. And I think you take some of that away, again, when you say require statewide or require each student.
I think there's some agreement on the each student part.
Okay.
Again, this recommendation, just to be clear, is not mandating how campuses or institutions accomplish this. It's just setting the statewide benchmark for getting 10% of the credits accomplished through any and all off-campus means, and then leaving it to each individual institution as to how they structure that.
Yeah, I understand that. I'm just not quite there.
Okay.
I think it goes back to the comment we made earlier about trying to find the balance between micro-legislating and encouraging a cultural shift to create efficiency. And how do you do that?
Okay, we got Scott and then Rich.
And our group had that rated very low. We were sort of ones and maybe a 2, I think, for some of the reasons that... and we're very happy to have Regent Payovich, actually. I'm grateful to have her on our board. But I guess, Fred, I do disagree. I don't know that you have to require something for something to happen through statewide, any action, et cetera. I think some of this is moving forward. I think as campuses determine the best ways to deal with some of these challenges, both in terms of moving students through. I mean, it goes back to, I guess, Mike's point. If you don't have competent leadership and we all have boards that we answer to that are trying to drive us in this direction, then it really will allow us to make progress. And then again, I do think while it doesn't explain how, it still, to me, is more of an input measure. I think we certainly want to encourage, and in many ways we already have, greater utilization of these alternative methods of delivery. But I think situations vary, and again, the biggest concern I had, as I mentioned before, was that I think it can create additional barriers for some of our students.
And the additional barriers were because the concern is, would these be available to all students?
Yeah,
Can they afford it?
It's another thing. It's another thing to track. It's another thing to report on. And again, it gets to, as opposed to sort of the ultimate output, can we get students through more quickly? Can we get them to degrees, et cetera? These are tools we can use. Some will use them very effectively. I think sharing best practices, et cetera. To me, that encouragement, that cultural shift, I think some of that is occurring and will continue. But.
Rich? Wait, I'm sorry. Do you have a comment on that? Rich?
I assume, but I think we need to clarify this. There are graduate programs. In some cases, they are out in the field more than 10%, but in others, probably wouldn't be appropriate to take the hour.
Yeah, see, Rich, I'm not concerned about this one because in the health-related, I mean, you've got so many doing clinicals out there, we blow this 10% out of the water. But
So we can apply this to health-related?
No reason to.
You're giving us the sleeves off your vest, in other words.
Could I go back and make a quick comment on Scott's input?
Sure.
That is, I'm very reluctant to do the legislative mandate thing. But I also realize that we are here because of status quo. And that, we have to remember that we're here because of status quo. So that would be my comment.
Okay. Well, and let me just... I think we're here because the circumstances of the state require us to continue to move forward and become more effective and more efficient. And I think... campuses throughout the state have worked hard. Faculty have worked hard. There have been a variety of other activities to become more effective, more efficient. Much of this, again, is moving forward. I think understanding it and finding ways to do it will help us. But and I guess I don't know, Bernie, if I fully agree that it's sort of we're here because of status quo. I think we need to accelerate. I think we need to move forward. We need to, as we've done, gather ideas from other states and other activities. But I think there's a great desire from all of our campuses to become more effective, more productive, and just trying to find ways to do it.
Okay, we've got a couple of more minutes. Let's go to number 3. Full-time, improved credit hours produced per full-time equivalent faculty member by 10%. Laurie, I'm just going to start off with you and get it over with.
Because I love Fred, I put 2 instead of 1. But
this does not say mandate or legislate.
But I just think, once again, it's micromanaging. I think you ought to encourage institutions to be more efficient, to do things and give recommendations. But I don't think that this is one of those things. I think we ought to figure out at the institutional level how we can improve our efficiency on the faculty level.
Okay. Bernie, let's just go to you.
Well,
and I'm ready for you, Bernie.
I'm ducking and dodging. Fine. Did you hear me?
Okay.
For example, at our community colleges, we've steadily increased the teacher-pupil ratio, if you will. And for every one student that we add, we save about $1 million. So there are efficiencies here in that sense. We've gone from, when I came on the board, from 1 to 17 to 1 to 22.2. That saved us a lot of money. So this year our goal is 24.
Wow. Okay. Commissioner?
Well, in response to Lori's comment, I apologize for seeming like I only walk up to the table when you make a comment. You have. Let me give you the 2 extremes. The challenge of dealing with faculty workload, particularly in regard to teaching, are these. Maryland mandated a 10% increase in faculty productivity as defined by contact hours with students, as defined by teaching load. They left it up to the campuses to determine this. This issue came up in California, and it was left to the faculty, where, as you know, in California, particularly in the University of California, faculty are very strong. They really have institutionalized the principle of shared governance. There was no willingness on the part of the faculty to make concessions to improve productivity, and the result has been faculty furloughs, where the state said we can't get faculty to do more, so we're simply going to have to cut faculty salaries. And now every faculty member at the University of California has to take, I forget what it is, but 2 or 3 days off a month without pay. So the evidence suggests that I agree with the principle to the extent that we can let institutions and systems address these issues themselves with satisfactory results, we should. But there are notable examples around the country where institutions and systems have not been willing to take on certain issues. And I would argue that the issue of faculty workload is one of those. And I don't think it's onerous to make a recommendation. We want faculty productivity to increase 10%. Institutions can figure out how to do that. They can figure out how to define increased contact and involvement with students. So there's plenty of latitude. But to simply say, let's let institutions tackle this on their own, doesn't seem to have worked.
Is there any evidence that Texas has this problem?
Well, there certainly is evidence that we have to find a way to increase faculty productivity given our economic situation. And I would hope that faculty would respond and say, just as we're telling everybody we have to do a little bit more with the resources we have, that faculty would step forward and say this is a better way to proceed than furloughs.
Yeah, I was wondering if there's any data that suggests that there's an unwillingness of faculty. That's what I meant.
Oh, I think there's plenty of evidence for that.
There's one other issue that the committee hasn't really talked about, but we've talked about with closing the gaps, is if several years ago we looked if we maintain the same student-faculty ratio in the state and reach our goal of 630,000 more students, we would need more than 30,000 new faculty. So another factor involved in this is to what extent can we reasonably hire 30,000 more faculty, when we reach that level. And so there's another consideration that beyond is, just practically speaking, will we be able to meet the needs of delivery doing exactly what we're doing now? And I think that's embedded in a number of your recommendations here, and whether they're structured correctly is another question, I think.
And David and Raymond, I think our discussion here was, and really applies to all of these, except number one, on this creating clear pathways. One, most of them we didn't talk about in the meetings, but two, they seem to be an effort to focus increasing productivity through regulation, focused on the input side, if you want. And I guess our sense was a clearer path to greater productivity, which is obviously what we're about, is on the incentive sides. And so that's really why we came down kind of across the board here, with exception number one, which we did talk about on the articulation, and I guess also on number four, where we hadn't talked about it, but we really didn't. The college readiness standards, we saw that as being worthwhile, really applying it at the K through 12 level and not in higher education.
And I just would just also indicate that, again, not uniformly, but I think, as we've studied this, one, our board has interest in this, so it's not an issue that's not been, productivity, et cetera. There has been progress in many and most of our institutions. There are other areas where they're not. We are aware of that. We're working on it. The only issue that I would say is that, again, just to reiterate, that I think this is an issue that clearly, because of increasing enrollments, because of a variety of reduced resources, that already has much of our attention. I don't know why 10%. I don't know why. Conceptually, I think it makes some sense. It's just in terms of how this was worded was not sure. Well, Woody said it better.
Well, I've certainly, speaking for myself, I've certainly got the message this morning that there's interest in incentivizing better productivity in a way that gives institutions the greatest amount of latitude to figure out how to do it themselves. I'm very comfortable with that.
I guess a question: does the coordinating board have information that indicates that all campuses have equal problem with this productivity issue? Because you say 10%, does that mean each campus then needs to improve 10%? There may be one campus that has already addressed this issue, and now they have to improve even more, or other campuses that may not have addressed this issue do not have to have that same end result in terms of workload. So is it statewide, 10% statewide, or how are you going to determine that? So that could be addressed, and I think it's a meaningful requirement.
Right. I think, make one more comment. We're already dealing with this. We're going to have to. I wish I could be more optimistic about the future of states funding higher education than I really am. I agree with many of the comments that's been made. The idea here is critical. We're already dealing with it at our university. Many universities need to deal with it, but how we phrase this and how we put it into effect as an encouragement or an incentive, I don't know. The wording needs some work on it. The idea is it's going to happen almost anyway. The force of, I'll say it, the Texas Coordinating Board behind it will help universities and administrators bring about these increased efficiencies that are just going to happen anyway.
I still think that having the telling us how to do it, when they tell us this is how many students are enrolled, and this is how much money you have to pay the bills, told us. I don't know why I need a law that tells me how to do the rest of it. I mean, that's the implication is this is what I have to do. The thing that I'm most concerned about is that we try to do one size fits all. At Texas A&M University, we've been doing our best to decrease the number of the student to faculty ratio, not increase it. We've been doing our best to decrease it for purposes of quality of education and intensity of the research and a whole bunch of other things. In reality, it's probably going to increase. But for us to say that that's what we want to do, I think we need to have mission specificity on that, because there's some of us who don't think that's what we want to do. We want to do exactly the opposite.
But that's the crux of the debate. We did hear testimony that said that class size is not the be-all, end-all measure of class quality.
No, it's very similar to the argument about, you remember 30 years ago, all of you been in academia will know this, that 30 years ago, one of the measures of the quality of your library was how many books you had. Nobody uses that metric anymore because you can get so many books online. And we now know that we have to find other ways to measure the quality of instruction and the quality of learning. Student-to-faculty ratio is no longer, because of the introduction of technology, blended courses and so forth, is no longer considered to be a significant metric for measuring institutional quality.
Except at U.S. News and World Report.
Well, yeah.
Which came out today,
We need to break because you guys need a little break and you need some lunch, and we need to be back here by 1. And I don't want you to get poisoned from old mayonnaise in here. So 1 o'clock, we're going to start back up. We'll start with number 4 on page 9.
I just saw it on the when the country first came.
All right, let's, those of you who are, most of you are here, starting on page 9, let's go to number 4 and discuss that one. That was the college readiness, should be articulated through a set of readiness standards. And let's go down to 4B. Should this be included as a short-term action? Let me just get a feel for your ratings on that one. This is on page 6, excuse me.
Page 9.
Page 9. Oh, put those glasses on, girl. 4B. I believe this should be included as a short-term action. College readiness. Bernie, what's your group got? What's your rank?
I got 5. 4. 5 points.
Okay.
5.
Lori, what's your group got back there?
Also talks about 4 and 2. What's our group?
The 2 because we shouldn't be here because of the count.
3 to 4. Okay, Rich, how about your group?
4. I have 4.
I have 5. 5, 4, and 1 abstention.
And an abstention? There better dadgum be a number circle by the time I pick that up. Mike, what about your group?
Circle what Patty will circle it for you. So
I'm worse after lunch.
I've got all 4s and 5s.
All 4s and 5s. Okay, let's talk about that. Let's have a brief discussion about that one. A clear statement of expectations regarding college readiness should be articulated through a set of readiness standards. Who wants to start?
Are you addressing the whole thing? There's 2 parts to it.
Well, the whole thing. I just read the first part of it.
Fred, you want to comment first on that? Okay, let's start this way.
Okay, well, let's just
As I testified the other day, I think this could be the most important thing that we've done in years to improve college readiness if we'll just stick with it. I mean, it's going to be difficult to do. If we're going to have college readiness standards, if we do, and I've looked at them and I think they're very strong, and end-of-semester exams that are tied to those standards, I'm really not sure we ought to go back to one test as the big diagnostic if we've done that. That's the only thing. Otherwise, I'd give this thing a 5.
Okay.
But I have some doubts about a diagnostic assessment tool to determine college readiness because I remember this type of effort before. Looks like we already have it. That's the readiness standards and the end-of-semester exams that are tied to it. Our biggest problem there, of course, and I'm getting off topic here a little bit, is I'm not sure we're producing enough secondary teachers to carry this out. Other than that, we ought to stay with it. My reservation, again, is a single diagnostic assessment tool, if we've done the other.
Okay, put microphone.
Two things. Number one, if there were a single diagnostic tool that were a great predictor of college success, we ought to all use it, and you ought to tell us what it is. The other thing is, if we have high schools who do, in fact, or public school systems that certify to us that they have completed the requirements to be prepared for college, and they are not, I believe that the public independent school districts should pay the bill for the remediation.
Well, that's an interesting thought.
Well,
I love it. I love it.
if you want to go to results orientation, you want to go to being accountable, it's all right. But if you tell us they're ready and they're not, you should pay. Just don't tell us they're ready. Yeah, it would have to be.
Interesting.
And that would never pass, but it's still a good idea.
I'm with a lot of those ideas that end with that will never pass.
It's been proposed. I would say that Senator Shapiro thinks it's a good idea.
It just struck me that, Mike, maybe you're saying something that could be done a little bit different way. I need to think through this. I'm still toying with the idea, and I think it's a good one, to move developmental education out of four-year public.
It's virtually gone.
I hope so. We're trying to get rid of it.
That is
I just need to be told to get rid of it.
It's like a crazed killer. You ought to stop us before we kill again. Yeah. But I think you ought to. I mean, if you're really going to require something, we use that word a lot in this report. If you really are going to require something, require us not to do it, to offer remedial. You call it whatever you want to, whatever euphemism you want to use, but we should not be allowed to offer remedial education at the university level. Yes.
Amen. Amen.
You'd have to close some universities.
Well, there's a difference, Raymond, between whether the universities provide them or whether they cannot accept.
I should be contracting with community colleges. I hire professors. I don't hire a single professor with a PhD with the intent of having to teach college algebra. They want to teach number theory and chaos and everything else. But I make some of them teach algebra. Community colleges hire people with the express intent of teaching algebra. They're better at it. They're more affordable. My guys are not good at it, and they don't like it. I mean, it looks like a match made in heaven. Just tell us we can't do it.
Okay, let's get back to this clear statement of expectations. This next group. Rich, your group.
Well, my abstention was on the basis of a single diagnostic assessment tool.
Okay, then you strongly disagree.
Can we probably, David, can you clarify
I think we need to clarify what, at least my understanding of what this is. So this is related to developmental ed. And you need to know that what we keep hearing from people who teach at your institutions is we need a single diagnostic tool.
You hear it particularly from community college presidents.
Yes, because and we had one in place at one time. The school said we need multiple tools for different reasons. And now they've found that they don't really have the adequate information to judge their own success or lack of success because all the assessments aren't equivalent and they measure things differently. So they've really been insisting to us that they need a single diagnostic, and that diagnostic needs to be close, really in line with the college and career readiness standards. Now, plus the system, you may recall, there's a standard if you make a certain score on the SAT or a certain score on the ACT or on, I never remember whether it's TEX or TEKS or whatever.
No, it's tax.
Tax. I didn't get it anywhere close. But you can be exempted based upon any of those. So, this is really about that assessment tool and what the people who work with developmental ed folks say would be much more effective in a way for them to clarify their own level of success and progress with students. They're wanting that single tool at this point. And so that's
David,
what that
needs to be
means.
Stated more clearly in this recommendation, then, if that's the case. That does shed some light on it.
Yeah, and Rich, I think I'm anticipating
in this document.
on your concerns, but this would be a threshold. This would be a minimal score. Institutions would have the authority to set their levels higher. So this, as I said, there's an interest in using a single tool and having threshold scores. Say that this is what is college readiness statewide. If you say that in order to succeed at Texas A&M, you need to have a higher score, that's up to the individual institution, but you can't go below this.
Well, there's a great deal of criticism from school superintendents because right now you can have a higher score, and they say they don't really know what the real target is for them because they think that their students have hit the target and then they happen to go to a different school and they discover there's an internal score that's higher, and that's something that has to be considered at some point.
Guys, we have got to move on or we will not complete this. Rich, is there anything from your group y'all want to say? Right here? No?
I think the only thing was that any testing ought to be given early, maybe in the junior level high school, so that it can be developmental education happen in K through 12 and not higher education.
We're moving in that direction.
The TEA is working on end-of-course assessment. Just that.
The reality is, and I don't have a mic, but I don't think I need one. Students will pass the SAT, they'll pass tax, teach, whatever it is, and they still will not be able to write a sentence when they get to it. So I'm not sure how we're going to get it at what we really need to be getting at, and that is in public schools they need to go back to teaching reading, writing, and arithmetic as opposed to teaching them how to pass tests. And I think that's exactly
Okay. Roberto, your group? Do y'all have anything?
Brenda has something.
Well, I just had a comment. Is this appropriate to put in the report of this committee? I'm having a hard time figuring out how it fits our specific mission.
I think the reason it's here is because
part of it's the way it's written, maybe, but I
see why you're asking that, Brenda, but the big idea, remember, is creating clear pathways in the sense that students don't waste credit hours that don't apply to the pathway to their desired degree. Institutions don't waste either state dollars or tuition dollars on teaching courses that are off target. And so this was intended to be just a building block in that clear pathway to represent the students in the shared responsibility model to represent the students' responsibility.
Yeah, I just don't see it as a finding or a short-term action, perhaps, unless it's rewritten or merged into the intro paragraphs or with another finding. Just something to think about.
Okay, good feedback. Any other comments? All right, let's go to page 10, 5. This is requiring students, we've already heard some about this, to have a degree plan by the end of their freshman year and require them to meet with an advisor prior to enrolling in a course that is not included in their degree plan. Let's start one group at a time. Should this be included as a short-term action? And we'll start over here with y'all. Mike, should this be included? 5?
Except I don't like the end of the freshman year. I don't know. And boy, that's sure.
What do you have?
I know we can argue over
Okay,
that.
I have a 4,
Something like
and she has a
45
1.
hours.
So
okay.
Students should clear degree plan
No later than
no later
the second semester of the sophomore year?
Well, or I thought you were saying a specific number of credit hours.
Yeah. Or say
30 hours by the end of 30 hours, file a degree plan.
Maybe
No later.
42 is the core. Maybe that's sort of that fits with what you're saying.
We understand the concern.
But otherwise, it all got pretty much all 5s.
yeah.
Okay. Raymond, how about your group?
Well, I voted 2-1 on the basis of 1 versus 4.
Okay.
I had 4, but I would qualify it that maybe at the end of the freshman year is not practical. And sophomore year is probably too late, but I like the idea of 45 credits. That puts you in the middle of the sophomore year.
Okay. Any other? Okay. Why don't you be sure to note that in your notes? That would be helpful. Scott, anybody in your group? What were y'all's? What was your range here?
1 to 3.
1 to 3. Anybody have any comments from there?
Not realistic, as freshmen, they want to change their majors, most likely 1 or 2 times.
Yeah, well, the reason they change their majors is we don't encourage them not to change their majors.
Oh, I agree. It would be wonderful if this were to happen, but I think it's building in problems for the advisors and all that kind of thing. So I think 45 hours I would agree with, at least to a certain extent, but realistically speaking, I know our students are not going to do it. So.
Okay.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Very definition of a lack of consensus.
Anybody care to comment over there?
Well, that's an average of 2.5.
That's pretty good.
Pretty good.
Elmo was the 4 because he couldn't figure out how this would ever apply to health related.
Doesn't it? We have no freshmen. We have freshmen or sophomores.
So you gave the 4?
I'm 4. Brenda's 1. She probably ought to.
Why are you tattling on Brenda?
She's irritating me is what's going on here.
She's sitting there minding her own business.
I know.
Comments over here.
Well, I just need more data, more information, more discussion on the point. That's frankly where I'm coming from. I'm not sold on it based on just the limited amount of discussion we've had on the item.
Okay. Anything else?
Okay.
Sounds good to me.
Okay. All right, let's go to page 11. There are 2 on here, and they weren't. The first one is authority. This is the big one. Authority to establish a new institution for online technology, and the second one was about e-textbooks. So if you will answer those, rate those, and answer the questions, let's try to do this one within 15 minutes.
Which page are we on again?
We're on pages 11 and 12.
11 and 12, okay.
11 and 12. All right, let's, those of you who are, most of you are here, starting on page 9, let's go to number 4 and discuss that one. That was the college readiness, should be articulated through a set of readiness standards. And let's go down to 4B. Should this be included as a short-term action? Let me just get a feel for your ratings on that one. This is on page 6, excuse me.
Page 9.
Page 9. Oh, put those glasses on, girl. 4B. I believe this should be included as a short-term action. College readiness. Bernie, what's your group got? What's your rank?
I got 5. 4. 5, 4.
Okay.
5.
Lori, what's your group got back there?
Also talks about 4 and 2. What's our grade?
The 2 because we shouldn't be here because it can't work.
3 to 4. Okay, Rich, how about your group?
4. I have 4.
I have 5.
5, 4, and 1 abstention.
And an abstention? There better dadgum be a number circle by the time I pick that up.
I'll just stay here for another meeting.
Mike,
Key
what
is
about
if you
your
don't
group?
circle it, Patty will circle it for you. So
I'm
you
worse
gotta make
after
sure you
lunch.
circle it.
I've got all 4s and 5s.
All 4s and 5s. Okay, let's talk about that. Let's have a brief discussion about that one. A clear statement of expectations regarding college readiness should be articulated through a set of readiness standards. Who wants to start?
Are you addressing the whole thing? There's 2 parts to it.
Well, the whole thing. I just read the first part of it.
Fred, you want to comment first? Okay, let's start this way.
Okay, well, let's just
As
do
I
that.
testified the other day, I think this could be the most important thing that we've done in years to improve college readiness if we'll just stick with it. And it's going to be difficult to do. If we're going to have college readiness standards, if we do, and I've looked at them and I think they're very strong, and end of semester exams that are tied to those standards I really not sure we ought to go back to one test, just being diagnostic, if we've done that. That's the only thing. Otherwise, I'd give this thing a 5.
Okay.
But I have some doubts about a diagnostic assessment tool to determine college readiness, because I remember this type of effort before. Looks like we already have it. That's the readiness standards and the end of semester exams that are tied to it. Our biggest problem there, of course, and I'm getting off topic here a little bit, is I'm not sure we're producing enough secondary teachers to carry this out. Other than that, we ought to stay with it. My reservation, again, is a single diagnostic assessment tool, if we've done the other.
Okay, put microphone.
Two things. Number one, if there were a single diagnostic tool that were a great predictor of college success, we ought to all use it, and you ought to tell us what it is. The other thing is, if we have high schools who do, in fact, or public school systems that certify to us that they have completed the requirements to be prepared for college, and they are not, I believe that the public independent school district should pay the bill for the remediation.
Well, that's an interesting thought.
Well,
I love it.
if you want to go to results orientation, you want to go to being accountable, it's all right. But if you tell us they're ready and they're not, you should pay. Just don't tell us they're ready. Yeah, it would have to be.
Interesting.
And that would never pass, but it's still a good idea.
Up with a lot of those ideas that end with that will never pass.
It's been proposed. I will tell you that Senator Shapiro thinks it's a good idea.
It just struck me that, Mike, maybe you're saying something that could be done a little bit different way. I need to think through this. I'm still toying with the idea, and I think it's a good one, to move developmental education out of 4-year public. That is 4 years.
It's virtually gone.
I hope so. We're trying to get rid of it.
That is my
I just need to be
testimony,
told to get rid of it.
It's like a crazed killer. You ought to stop us before we kill again.
Yeah.
But I think you ought to. I mean, if you're really going to require something, we use that word a lot in this report. If you really are going to require something, require us not to offer remedial. You call it whatever you want to, whatever euphemism you want to use, but we should not be allowed to offer remedial education at university level.
Amen. Amen.
You'd have to close some universities.
Well, there's a difference, Raymond, between whether the universities provide them or whether they cannot accept.
I should be contracting with community colleges.
That's largely
I
what
hire
happens.
professors. I don't hire a single professor with a PhD with the intent of having to teach college algebra. They want to teach number theory and chaos and everything else. But I make some of them teach algebra. Community colleges hire people with the express intent of teaching algebra. They're better at it. They're more affordable. My guys are not good at it, and they don't like it. I mean, it looks like a match made in heaven. Just tell us we can't do it.
Okay, let's get back to this clear statement of expectations. This next group. Rich, your group.
Well, my abstention was on the basis of a single diagnostic assessment tool.
Okay, then you strongly disagree.
Can we probably, David, can you clarify
I think we need to clarify what, at least my understanding of what this is. So this is related to developmental ed. And you need to know that what we keep hearing from people who teach at your institutions is we need a single diagnostic tool.
You hear it particularly from community college presidents.
Yes, because and we had one in place at one time. The school said we need multiple tools for different reasons. And now they've found that they don't really have the adequate information to judge their own success or lack of success because all the assessments aren't equivalent, and they measure things differently. So they've really been insisting to us that they need a single diagnostic, and that diagnostic needs to be close, really in line with the college and career readiness standards. Now, plus the system, you may recall, there's a standard if you make a certain score on the SAT or a certain score on the ACT or on, I never remember whether it's TEX or TEKS or whatever.
No, it's tax.
And I didn't get it anywhere close. But you can be exempted based upon any of those. So, this is really about that assessment tool and what the people who work with developmental ed folks say would be much more effective in a way for them to clarify their own level of success and progress with students. They're wanting that single tool at this point, and so that's
David,
what that
needs to be
means.
stated more clearly in this recommendation. Then, if that's the case, that does shed some light on it.
Yeah, and Rich, I think I'm anticipating
in this document
on your concerns, but this would be a threshold. This would be a minimal score. Institutions would have the authority to set their levels higher. So this, as I said, there's an interest in using a single tool and having threshold scores. Say that this is what is college readiness statewide. If you say that in order to succeed at Texas A&M, you need to have a higher score, that's up to the individual institution. But you can't go below this.
Although there's a great deal of criticism from school superintendents because right now you can have a higher score, and they say they don't really know what the real target is for them because they think that their students have hit the target and they happen to go to a different school and they discover there's an internal score that's higher, and that's something that has to be considered at some point.
Guys, we have got to move on or we will not complete this. Rich, is there anything from your group y'all want to say? Back here? No?
I think the only thing was that any testing ought to be given early, maybe in the junior level high school, so that it can be developmental education happen in K-12 and not higher education.
We're moving in that direction.
The TEA is working on end-of-course assessments. You just have.
The reality is, and I don't have a mic, but I don't think I need one, students will pass the SAT, they'll pass tax, TEKS, whatever it is, and they still will not be able to write a sentence when they get to this. And so I'm not sure how we're going to get it at what we really need to be getting at, and that is in public schools, they need to go back to teaching reading, writing, arithmetic as opposed to teaching them how to pass tests. And I think that's exactly what
Okay. Roberto, your group? Y'all have anything?
Brenda has something.
Well, I just had a comment. Is this appropriate to put in the report of this committee? I'm having a hard time figuring out how it fits our specific mission.
I think the reason it's here is because
part of it's the way it's written, maybe, but
I see why you're asking that, Brenda, but the big idea, remember, is creating clear pathways in the sense that students don't waste credit hours that don't apply to the pathway to their desired degree. Institutions don't waste either state dollars or tuition dollars on teaching courses that are off target. And so this was intended to be just a building block in that clear pathway to represent the students and the shared responsibility model to represent the students' responsibility.
Yeah, I just don't see it as a finding or a short-term action, perhaps, unless it's rewritten or merged into the intro paragraphs or with another finding. Just something to think about.
Okay, good feedback. Any other comments? All right, let's go to page 10, 5. This is requiring students, we've already heard some about this, to have a degree plan by the end of their freshman year and require them to meet with an advisor prior to enrolling in a course that is not included in their degree plan. Let's start one group at a time. Should this be included as a short-term action? And we'll start over here with you. Mike, should this be included? 5?
Yeah. Except I don't like the end of the freshman year. I don't know. I mean, boy, that's sure. What do you have? We can argue over that.
I have a 4,
something like
and she has a 1.
Okay.
Students who declare a degree plan.
No later than
No later.
the second semester of the sophomore year?
Well, or I thought you were saying specific number of credit hours.
Yeah. Or say
30 hours by the end of 30 hours, file a degree plan.
Maybe
No later.
42 is the core. Maybe that's sort of that fits with what you're
We
saying.
understand the concern.
But otherwise, it all got pretty much all 5s.
Yeah.
Okay. Raymond, how about your group?
Well, I voted 2-1 on the basis of 1 versus 4.
Okay.
I had 4, but I would qualify it that maybe at the end of the freshman year it's not practical. And sophomore year is probably too late, but I like the idea of 45 credits. That puts you in the middle of the sophomore year.
Okay. Any other? Okay. Why don't you be sure to note that in your notes? That would be helpful. Scott, anybody in your group? What were y'all's? What was your range here?
1 to 3.
1 to 3. Anybody have any comments from there?
Not in this case, freshmen, they want to change their majors, most likely 1 or 2 times.
Yeah, well, the reason they change their majors is we don't encourage them not to change their majors.
Oh, I agree. It would be wonderful if this were to happen, but I think it's building in problems for the advisors and all that kind of thing. So I think 45 hours I would agree with, at least to a certain extent, but realistically speaking, I know our students are not going to do it. So.
Okay.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Very definition of a lack of consensus.
Anybody care to comment over there?
Well, that's an average of 2.5.
That's pretty good.
Pretty good.
Elmo was the 4 because he couldn't figure out how this would ever apply to health-related.
Doesn't it? We have no freshmen. We have freshmen or sophomores.
So you get the 4?
I'm 4. I'm 4. Brenda's 1. She probably ought to.
Why are you tattling on Brenda?
She's irritating me is what's going on here.
She's sitting there minding her own business.
I know.
Comments over here.
Well, I just need more data, more information, more discussion on the point. That's frankly where I'm coming from. I'm not sold on it based on just the limited amount of discussion we've had on the item.
Okay. Anything else?
Okay.
Sounds good to me.
Okay. All right, let's go to page 11. There are 2 on here, and they weren't. The first one is authority. This is the big one. Authority to establish a new institution for online technology, and the second one was about e-textbooks. So if you will answer those, rate those, and answer the questions. Let's try to do this one within 15 minutes.
Which page are we on again?
We're on pages 11 and 12.
11 and 12, okay.
11 and 12. Coordinated board should be granted the authority to establish a new institution's charter to deliver AA and AF programs statewide using online technology.
I'm the statistical outlier this time. We've got 1s and 2s, and then they've got me on the 5, okay? And I'm going to have to figure out what to say here. Say something brilliant or something. Let's see. We could all agree that our student body computer literacy is skyrocketing. We can probably, if I'm in the industry and there's this law called Moore's Law, I think it is, where compute power doubles every 18 months and the price goes down by 50% every 18 months. And I've heard Dr. Michio Kaku, whoever he is, on the Discovery Channel, when he says that, 5-10 years from now, the central processor of a computer will be every bit as powerful as your brain. And so I say all that just to say that as a competing model, delivery system, or whatever, I think we should go there. I really do. I think we should go there. I'm not a big fan of putting on a new tie with an old suit, but I know there's a lot of thought process here that each and every bricks and mortar university should be in the game. I think it should be a competing model on its own, And I think it should be built from the ground up. And you know, let's see if all the pushback, all the doubting, see if it holds true, without polluting it with the old paradigm, bureaucratic processes and overhead and all that good stuff. So that's my 5, and I've got 1s and 2s here who might want to speak up as well.
I rated it a 1, simply because the jury is still out on the rigor of such a degree. Raymond talked earlier about community colleges putting out, rigorous candidates for the upper level institutions, and that is an issue. We're doing a lot already in that area that community colleges are. For example, we're one of the largest providers of online education in the state as well, but we have a combination. There are areas like math and science that need to have a little bit more rigor, and we need to get people that can relate to students in a one-to-one basis, or at least in a classroom setting. The other thing is, too, we have a lot of at-risk students. Getting them on a computer might increase the failure rate. I mean, they're not as self-sufficient as maybe some of the other students. And then there's also availability for students. And I'm only talking about community college kids. They may not, a lot of them do not have computers at home. They depend on coming to the campus to access technology. And those are just some of the reasons why I did a 1.
How about your group?
We had, I guess, 1
to 3.
1 to 4. So let me just speak on this 4. I mean, the issues for me, if I look at cost efficiencies and cost effectiveness, I don't know that this is the best model. I know Maryland has used it, but I think of additional, I think of the additional bureaucracy of this, additional accrediting, which was mentioned, etc. There are expenses that would be needed as set up as a separate unit. I also, I guess, am coming from my own experience as we looked at this within our system and had not the same, but we had a telecampus unit that was centrally located, and we found difficulty in sort of managing that, engaging the faculty on the campuses, because it was removed a little bit from them. And so, if you were setting up a separate organization, I'm afraid it may create duplication. You actually have to at least engage faculty and contract bases, etc., and diminish some of the work that's being done on the campus or duplicate it. So I think the idea of utilizing more online education for me makes perfect sense. This delivery mechanism for me does not. But, I don't know. What do you?
Well, I guess my only comment, I rated it a little higher than I probably would have otherwise, based on the thought that you could really have private industry deliver the product through contract, some kind of incentivized risk-sharing contract, that there's plenty of expertise out there, and you wouldn't have to create the bureaucracy. You just have to give incentives to an online producer to meet your specs.
Laurie?
I agree with what Roberto said. I think the community colleges are on the forefront of this. I know that Austin Community College has done an excellent job with this for years and years. And so I think that perhaps we could put more emphasis at where it's already being done well, and perhaps give them more incentive to do a little bit more of it, or share their expertise with four-year institutions who are not quite doing as much of this.
The Virtual College of Texas, is this something in addition to that, or because doesn't that already provide associate's degrees online?
I think that, and I got a call from a reporter because this hasn't been well defined here, but I think there are a number of things that are on the table. Number one, I think one of the reasons this came up initially is if we're talking about a couple 100,000 more students, should we have to continue to build campuses all around the state, and to what extent could some of that be fulfilled through a different model? It is a model where it's been implemented is you have typically better quality because it's not an institution by institution thing, and you really get some of the scale issue. And at least as I understand the UT telecampus, they were managing things, but it was still campus based, and so there were in some areas there were multiple programs being offered the same program rather than one program. I think there were at least 3 MBAs, for example. So it's a different thing. There was discussion here about the possibility of building on the Virtual College of Texas. There was a possibility of contracting or working with the Western Governors University, for example, rebranding, which they did do in Illinois. I think this hasn't been really clarified. I think there are a number of options, but it isn't just, it would be likely to be more competency-based, which is like Western Governors University. It's a different model that would serve some students well and other students not so well. And we still have in Texas the access issue, which is beyond diversity, which is this physical, geographic location. One thing that when people talk about computers that they don't talk about is virtually every library in Texas has access to these types of programs now. I mean, once TextShare became available through those, you have access to library resources that soon can go into the Austin Public Library. And so in a way, we're not really thinking about everything that's available and how one can bring them together in a truly different model. But it's not defined here. I mean, there are lots of different ways of going, and so I think you really need to define it better, or say, it needs to be really examined closely and put out an alternative that would work, that really is not just a duplication of things that are already being offered, Scott, which I think would be a mistake. You don't want to suck away existing faculty to do this if it happens, I don't think.
Is Western Governors, are they still struggling? I mean, I know they struggled. I mean, the concept makes a lot of sense. I just don't know if
they don't have huge enrollment, and from what I think last I saw, it's about 6,000 or 7,000. And the issue that their chancellor mentioned to us is really access to grants. And I don't know if they worked this out, but they essentially told us that they would rebrand immediately for Texas if we wanted, they would have access to state loans.
This is Dennis. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
This is one where I do have some information. Western Governors is now at about 15,000.
Okay, it's bigger.
And it's Indiana, not Illinois, David. But,
thank you.
But what they've done there is basically say that they will again rebrand for Indiana. The arrangement is that their students will have access to the equivalent of the Texas Grant Program, and that's the only dollar that the state has in the game.
Yeah, and that's essentially what they expressed to us. And of course, our issue would be we don't have enough Texas grants for people to begin with, and that's problematic. But that's what they said. And Scott, my understanding that the school became once they were under new leadership with the current chancellor, things really began to turn around. But another advantage of this group, at least as it's been explained to me, is their curriculum has been developed directly in line with industry. And so, I mean, their programs are much more focused, much like Phoenix, which they don't have everything that you would have at your typical university, but they have aligned that with industry when they develop that. And the competencies is really what they've aligned, because they don't really offer courses per se.
I thought that the virtual college was simply a clearinghouse for all the courseware that taxpayers have funded. Is that not the case? It's just it's a warehouse.
The Virtual College of Texas?
Yes.
That's a way, as I understand it, and Ben, you may be able to shed more light on it because we're missing our two community college presidents today, but that's where community colleges are able to share courses that they've already created online between different campuses and institutions.
So from my way of thinking, most of that, the big cost is developing the courseware. We already have a clearinghouse for that. Okay, the taxpayers have already funded that. It seems to me, for the academics to get together and put it all together into a university and at least allow people who want to earn a 2-year degree online to do so. I mean, you don't have to force anybody to do it, but there's a tremendous number of people who would probably prefer to go that route. They are, in fact, going that route already. So,
my understanding is you enroll in one of those courses and take it online, wherever you are.
Well, yeah,
the institutions produce. Now, it's been a long time since when it first got started, I was involved with it. You'd go to the nearest one if you could and enroll, but then you took it online and maybe used the testing center. But that you were able to get, and I'm not
saying this is a bad idea. I'm just saying the institutions would provide courses and online.
My understanding is it's really a different kind of animal as it's currently structured. It doesn't award degrees. Individual community colleges still do. And it's really a fill-in-the-gaps approach. So if you don't have a certain biology course on your campus, you can provide it to your students through Virtual College of Texas. Or if you have a shortage in terms of sections, that you can supplement them with this. And I think it's been very effective for that particular goal. But I think it's limited to that, I believe.
We need to summarize this conversation and go forward.
I would suggest that the new institution charter be needed and that allow competition. This is a good concept. Is there a university that wants to take the lead in charting a new course? Is there a consortium that's going to come together? Is the private sector going to step forward? To say you're going to charter a new institution, maybe narrowing the focus at this point.
Actually, I marked this fairly low as far as accurately reflecting the discussion, but fairly high as the potential for a short-term action, because all of what you're describing is not intended to be precluded by this wording. In other words, the coordinating board doesn't want to be in the business, and Raymond, jump in here anytime, but we don't want to, we want to see this created, but we certainly don't want to manage it or run it. That's not the idea, if that's connoted at all.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Would you make my point for me? The intent was to within a relatively short period of time, see if, looking at all those alternatives you described, if we could create and launch a online-only standalone institution. Now, whether it's part of a system, a current system, whether it's with a contract with a provider like Western Governors, as was used an example, whether it's through some new structure we haven't even invented yet with community colleges. We're not presuming the answer to that yet. We are saying, let's get it done and not wait for another 2 years to roll by.
Rich, I think it's low-hanging fruit for University of North Texas or any system, really. I think whoever gets there first, I think, is going to be surprised at the demand. I really do.
Well, one of the other reasons I raised this low is that when we discussed this, generally, we were talking about having the first 60 hours that students take be consistent for every institution. And this particular idea specifies AA and ASs. You know, if we're really going to look at something like that, I mean, you need to look at, are we requiring a degree completion if they get into this, or can they transfer like normal kids do? Is this just for community colleges, or is it for the first 60 hours of the student's experience in higher ed?
Roberto, you've accomplished what only Laurie has before. You got the commissioner coming forward to answer that, because you've actually touched on one of my questions when I reviewed this, which is why stop with AA? Right.
Well, wouldn't the solution be to examine the feasibility of creating some sort of statewide, comprehensive higher education institution, whether it should be a 2-year or 4-year institution, should be the result of some examination of what's most needed?
Raymond, I think I really have something to contribute to this. First of all, I don't think we ought to put AA or AS. I don't like the idea of establishing a new institution. There's a tremendous amount of redundancy in our efforts at online education. At Midwestern, our one outlier program is our adult completion degree that we graduate 300 people a year in. The whole thing is offered over online. We create it all. We teach it all. We have a unit to do it. If we had courses offered and administer this through some type of a unit that would see that it's done, that it continues to improve, that it continues to exist, we could take what's being done out there and cut cost. And see, we wouldn't have to produce our own. So I don't think we're talking about a new institution. I don't think we're talking about an AA degree. I don't think we're talking about the first 60 hours. but we could put a tremendous amount of material out there that institutions could draw from. We're all creating our own. I mean, there's a lot of online education going on.
We have about 80,000 students in the last 5 years that only need about 30 hours to finish a degree.
Yeah.
About 80,000.
See, that's another great application here. One of the largest pools of students for higher education in this state and others are those that have 70 or 80 hours and are working full-time and have been to 5 universities and colleges, and they'll never get back unless we go to them. And this kind of system can do it.
That's a very good point.
Okay, one more point.
Okay.
And it's yours. How about that for a coincidence?
They within the A&M system, I mean, and can do it within the other systems too. But we are taking existing programs and expertise that exist at the different universities, and we've got 4 or 5 that have agreed. It's not one of those where we require, it's where we have people who see that this is a way to address it. But we are cross-listing courses. We've just started, so I think the jury is still out on whether that is an efficient way of doing it. We figured out the financing of it. We've got that figured out, but it's within a system, cross-listing courses. I don't understand why the expertise for every single course in any degree in the state of Texas exists within a university at the state of Texas. It would seem to me like the coordinating board would simply coordinate. I mean, I understand there may be a need for some legislation actually giving the authority, but the expertise exists, and if we can get the best teachers, as determined by somebody who actually can tell who the best teachers are. When you're online, you can have them get the degree or get the course at their campus. It doesn't have to be all or none. Most of it's going to be hybrid, and I think that's the part about having the rural part. Some people learn by online. Some people learn other courses online. As you get older, right now all you have to do is tell me what page of the book. I don't need somebody to teach me. I can read. But I got 18-year-olds. You need to show them what page it's on. So I just think that coordinating among what already exists, letting them have the degree at the university to which they get admitted. We already do some of that, but I think you improve the quality of the teaching if you will cross-list the courses and coordinate. You coordinate the curriculum. Everybody will have the same curriculum at that point, all the way through the degree program. But that it be coordinated, and the equipment is so cheap now. It's just easy to do, and you can do it online. You can take it in your pajamas, or you can go to campus. The one thing that is weak in all of this is you've got to have the counseling. I mean, all these other things we've talked about since we started about counseling and advising and all of that. You can't just put it online. You can't put it and leave. Somebody's got to advise them. Somebody's got to answer their questions. And that could be online too. But you're going to have at each of the universities. You're going to have somebody to put a face to it. That's a lecture. I'm sorry.
Anything else significant that we need to discuss?
One last thing related to this, and that is if you're queasy about online learning, you could bring the brightest and best, highly rated by the students, professors, into everybody's home. The wideband technology now is so cheap. Why would you limit? You don't need to limit an outstanding professor, to 20 kids anymore. You can leverage that professor out to 1,000 kids. So that's just another twist on where technology can take us.
Just out of curiosity, how many here have either taught, taken, or seen an online course? So most have at least seen an an online course? Because I'm not sure that everybody's picturing the same content and delivery.
And they're harder to teach than an in-person course, I'm going to tell you.
But I think it's important to note that not all online simply means you're replicating what's in the classroom. So some of it is simply, when we talk about that professor, you got the materials, you spent the money to deliver lectures and take advantage of the technology, and then some of it's more of a tutorial process, and it's not somebody sitting there on camera. That's a lot of what's done, but for this to really branch out and to take advantage of the technology, you have to spend some real course development. And some of that's not as possible when you have 80 faculty in the state teaching that same course online, because you don't really pool the costs in a significant
Okay, we're moving on. We've got to move on here. Got to move on. Hopefully, this next one won't take us very long. I'm going to do a little different one. This is page 12, number 2. This is about encourage. Oh, we're not requiring. We don't have legislation. We're encouraging colleges and universities to participate in a pilot study to evaluate the use of e-textbooks on affordability for students. First of all, if you are in favor of this action item, would you just raise your hand? And that's 4 or 5. Okay. Anybody opposed? Anybody have something in opposition they want to say about that?
I think it doesn't include all that we talked about. E-books that's not the end all. I think there's a whole bunch of other options, rental books and things like that. Yeah.
Okay.
But it was what the student regents were legislatively charged with studying and recommending.
And we also have a long-term action associated with that we'll cover at the very end. All right, let's go on to capital financing. And there's only one short-term action on this. So would you take 5 minutes, write your answers?
Yeah.
And we will take this one too, those who are opposed and those who are for. Page 13. There's only one short-term action under this one.
Or you just changed from
I'm glad you came over here.
I'll stand my ground.
Got you in the neighborhood.
I didn't get close to Benny because I knew we were going to get.
You don't like the way I do this, do you?
Oh, no, it's a terrible one.
All the academics would run away from this. Well, your users don't know what it's costing.
You know, if we start seeing gas,
You'll charge the athletic.
What'd you do, Rich? Good, 5 to 5?
You don't charge the college level art?
I had 3 on the first one because I didn't recall the conversation about charging rent internally.
It wasn't very lengthy.
But I think if I did recall a conversation about privatization and leasing classroom buildings to the university. So that's why I said 3. Listening to the conversation this morning, I got a point where I said, in terms of short-term action, they're still killing it.
So it's underwrote.
Can it be done other ways rather than creating an administrative function?
This gift mixed in. Right, and if you're Texas Tech or UT Austin, you also got what you do. Pay you the rent
We're going to do pros and cons. First of all, who is against? Who does not think this should be included as a short-term action? Raise your hand. Well, Rich, could we hear from you, please?
I think we've seen in this report where it talks about degree programs where we only have 1 or 2 or 3 people in them, and it says we need to address that. But if we're going to really know what the true cost of programs are, that we need to include fiscal plan. And it may cause people to start getting smarter on how they use their facilities. And it certainly will allow us to allocate the cost of various programs to programs. So it also will allow people to look at options of renting space, or there was talk about privatization, using some private facilities. It will open up all of those options if you know you're paying rent at whatever location you're going to be at, and it will force us to be more competitive, but it will allow for proper decision making. You need to know what it costs to be able to make a smart decision on whether that program is a cost-effective program.
Pro. Anybody else in favor of this?
Well, yeah, I am for the reasons Rich just articulated. And it's ironic that yes, there's some administrative headache into defining this in the front end, but in the long run, it's a no cost to anybody other than setting it up in the beginning recommendation, and yet everybody's kind of worried about the headaches. And my argument is, if the dean of liberal arts or the dean of the College of Business doesn't understand what the cost to finance, operate, and maintain their facilities are, what incentive does the user have to use the space efficiently and to ask prudently? I win either way. I'm in the construction industry. Heck, I want everybody to keep building as much as they can build, but I don't think it's an efficient, steward-like use of the state's resources.
Well, I would insist that you can still pay all these costs centrally, and if you want to allocate, do some kind of cost allocation model, you can still do that to find out what is the cost of individual programs. This would concern me. It's not just a setup cost and so forth. It's just a matter that where do these departments get the money to pay this rent? They get it from the central office. I mean, it's part of our budgetary process.
It's a change in the budgetary process. I would agree.
That's it. So we give it to them, then we'll take it back from them.
They're not literally writing a check, but it's a fund accounting method to allocate the cost of...
Some departments have the ability to earn funds, for example, engineering departments potentially, that a history department may not. So does that mean that all of a sudden he who has the gold gets more room because they've got the money, they can afford the space? Well, that shouldn't be a driving factor as to space assignments. That's why I said in my initial comments at the beginning of this meeting that you need a strong space allocation committee that is active, and that those individuals then set up these methodologies as far as how space is allocated on the campus.
Would your issue be addressed if you just deleted that phrase, charging rent for space inhabited by each department, so that you do have an internal market for space allocation, that you do have a space allocation?
I mean, it's charging in quotes is the intention.
Yeah. I don't think it's meant, I hope you didn't mean that a richer department would be able to buy up more space. It would be part of this. It would be part of the decision-making process as to how space is allocated. You would know what that department cost. Just as we don't take the formula money and distribute it
right
according to the formula to the various departments.
I mean, it's to me this was a lot. We assumed, obviously incorrectly, or we haven't expressed it well, that this would be more user-friendly to the institutions in the sense that they would create their own model. I think to be consistent, it should include, not just the capital financing, but the operations and maintenance costs. But it would, be up to the institutions to allocate it to the users and how it's reflected in the users' budgets, as opposed to the coordinating board just arbitrarily saying 35 hours a week is not enough. We're just going to arbitrarily increase it to 40 or what have you.
See, I'm saying instead of the institutions allocating this money, the institutions are allocating the square footage to these space committees.
No, but what if we increased the coordinating board, raise its utilization standard, and let the campuses figure it out?
Well, I think that's what you do at present with the health-related institutions, because the general academics have standards as it pertains to classroom utilization, so that's not applied to health-related by the coordinating board. So.
Okay, anybody else want to speak on the disagree side?
Just
This is on the disagree side. I mean, I think there is a cost because it's kind of a Band-Aid and covers up the kind of our dysfunctional tuition revenue bond system right now. So it's essentially it's a political beauty contest and everybody wants to participate because if you don't get your building, but even whether you need the building or not. And so if you take those dollars that we essentially spend on tuition revenue bonds every year, put them in the formula, then each institution would have a choice. Do they want to use a part of their formula to cover a debt service requirement to build a new building, or do they want to put the money into operations or some other use? And so to me, that's the end solution, and this is more of an interim or a Band-Aid to try to make things more efficient. But as long as it's a political process to allocate capital, and rather than making each institution make a choice, you've got a misallocation of capital.
Well, this was intended to be the short-term action, and then the replacing of TRBs with a better long-range, better financing and long-range planning tool was the long-term recommendation. So if we can come up, if there's a better idea to make that transition quicker to a more efficient allocation, let's define it.
But you want to write the community colleges out of this, don't you?
Say that.
You want to write the community colleges out of this, don't you? They're not involved with the TRBs.
Well, they're not. We don't oversee your facilities, so
right.
Maybe it's just a best practice that community college boards should consider.
Fred, we're doing it already. We're doing a space allocation. We did a space allocation study, and now we've got a software program that runs it, and it's kept fail.
Yeah.
So we're doing that ourselves.
Yeah, we're averaging like 35 square feet per student, and the national standard is 100 square feet. So I think we're doing okay.
Interesting.
So we can point to the community colleges as an example of efficient space use.
The ones with poor facilities, yeah. We're trying to get it. We're trying to get it to 50. Yeah.
And again, I just want to I think as a business officer, I certainly understand the value of understanding the costs of space and trying to find ways to allocate it. And clearly, we need to become more efficient. The challenge I have is that just intuitively, cost efficiencies do not come through increased regulation. And the requirement to do it in a certain way rather than, as the Commissioner said, sort of maybe setting a standard and allowing us to find different ways, whether it's a space committee, whether it's a model. Some of our campuses, we're bifurcated. We've got campuses right now who have a cost model. MD Anderson's a different kind of animal, but they know the cost per square footage, but that's different than some of our other campuses. And so having some increased flexibility, some ways to do it, but I don't want that to be interpreted as that this isn't an important thing. I think the concept makes right.
Well, maybe so, because it's interesting that a couple of people have used the word regulation when we actually viewed this as a much broader, less onerous measure than we could take, which would be to arbitrarily increase the space utilization requirements. So maybe, going back to Rich's suggestion, if we just take the word rent out or just describe it as, ask that each of our campuses allocate the cost of their space across departments and leave it at that. And leave it up to the institutions as to how they do it. Is that?
Well, I guess I think if we could find a way to focus on outcomes, on trying to become more efficient, more effective, and consider a broad range of ways to do that, so I'm not being very helpful, Fred.
Well, yeah, I'm looking for an alternative here.
I know.
Other than we don't want to do this.
No, right.
Probably the leading choice.
I would prefer it rather than having a new coordinating or rule saying here's the threshold you have to meet. This is providing the information to the systems, to the institution, to the state as to how space is being allocated, how much it costs relates to how much programs cost, what initiatives cost. A good base of information to make those smart decisions. Again, it's a piece of information we don't have now. We've got for internal decision making as well as statewide decision.
Rick, I'm curious. I noticed you were one of the ones who was opposed to this idea, but it really stemmed from Guy Bailey, your president, saying this is something he was looking into because of his experience in
Clearly,
Missouri.
on an institution basis, each of us has the ability as the management of that institution to task the institution with coming up with its own plan. I don't think we need a state regulation or a legislative mandate. Good business practice. That's what Guy's doing within the university, and we feel pretty good about it. We'll come up with outcomes and allocation based on the mission of Texas Tech University.
And we're not, as you can tell by the language, we don't know that this necessarily requires legislative action. But if it's not a statewide, how do you get best practices to be practiced statewide?
Well, Fred, I think I recommended this earlier in the process, but can't we devise a template or a criteria list, something like that, and say, here's some management recommendations that you can use to, measure your own institution to see how you're doing, and accomplish a lot when we're talking about guide those institutions reacting to those things. And once you do that, then it becomes what you do on a day-to-day basis. That may not be a complete idea, but I think it's something like that. Like Raymond, if the coordinating board would do that, just say these are the areas that you need to address. Here are some of the concerns in those areas, and then let everybody get to work on it.
First off, space is the coin of the realm already. That is the coin that if you deal with. Yes, ma'am. Oh, this one. Space is Mike. Space is the coin of the realm. That comes right under importance, right under your parking space. I'm just telling you, on campus, that's the two most contentious discussions that we have.
Amen.
Okay, so with that aside, Woody is on point. Right now, there's a restriction on the use of general revenue. We can't use general revenue for construction. Put it in the formula and remove it. That would take legislative action, but put stuff in the formula and let us make a decision on whether or not we want to remodel or rebuild or build new buildings or hire teachers or whatever it is that we want to do. But right now there is a restriction that even if we save up money, if it is general revenue, we can't use that on buildings. So that's one of the things that you should probably look at. That would be an easy change that would make a difference to some of us. My question is about on the space utilization. If you change the requirements, I've always contended that a rule or a law without a penalty was a mere suggestion, and so I don't know even now what happens if I don't have space utilization numbers that are adequate. I mean, all I do is get on a list, right? I mean, it doesn't cost me any money.
That's been a topic of a lot of conversation here the last...
Well, that's what I'm saying. When you're talking about using that as the way of getting it done. Well, at present, the coordinating board has a space utilization formula, separate formula for the health science centers and the general academics, and it compares as far as teaching space versus clinical space versus office space, etc. And so we all have a predicted square footage from the coordinating board, and then we measure every square foot of our respective campuses, so we compare actual to predicted. And we're only funded for physical plant costs on that predicted. I don't care how much square footage you have. If you're overbuilt, you pay for that additional cost out of your pocket some other way. So that already exists with the coordinating board, has for many, many years, obviously. Or if you're underbuilt, you get funded for what you don't have. I'm not in that position.
Quick poll then, how many, the one specific, there were two specific ideas. One is essentially an expansion of the institutional report card on some of these things that Roberto brought up. Here's some best practices, let's measure them and put them on the report card. And I think, Rich, you made a comment along those lines as well. The second one has come up twice, and that is to take TRB funding, which one could debate whether there will or won't be any, but that's one of the problems with it. But take capital funding more broadly and put it into the formulas, and then leave it to the institutions to decide how to allocate between construction, maintenance, and programs. How many feel like that would be a better approach as a short-term action? 4 hands, 5?
That all depends on...
With a whole bunch of caveats, but...
Yeah, a whole bunch of caveats.
What I mostly see is everybody from the elbow.
Because then you get the special line.
How about the current, commitments to debt service?
Right.
The ability to use this for debt service. In other words, I don't need $1 million. I need the $40 million that I can make debt service on with the million.
I think that's probably a greater step. I guess the question is that really feasible?
So if you look statewide with our new institution, that share of their allocation would be hard enough to get to sign to achieve those goals. We have a wide variety of campuses and financial structures. And
it'd have to be a different formula.
With new institution, we really need to think about how they would ever fund new construction.
But the problem is now we're paying on buildings we don't need. So we're going to have to, over a long period of time, we'll have savings because there'll be a more rational allocation because the institutions will be making the decisions what they need. Right now, they're going to go ask for the tuition revenue bond whether they need it or not because it's the only way they're going to get that state funding is in the form of a building. I mean, to me, it's an irrational system, and the sooner you stop it, the sooner you get your savings into the buildings that need to be built, including new campuses, etc.
Don't you remember about, I guess, 5 years ago or 6 years ago, we had basically a rational approach, and that is we had to turn the stuff into the coordinating board ahead of time, and there was basically a scoring on what the need was, what the priority was. If you were going to pay, the more of it you were going to pay, the more points you got on the rating. And there was a whole rating of TRB projects, and they were promptly ignored by those who have a certificate of election. And that's why I'm just saying that there was a rational approach to it. I thought that was a great way of doing it. But honestly, the legislature doesn't have control of a whole lot of money or a whole lot of how we spend things. Most of it's told to them how they have to do it. I just think politically it's going to be hard to ever remove that from them, since that's one of the few things they do actually have control of. So that's just. But you already have a good system, and you had a good system in place. You might just resurrect it.
Well, it's alluded to in that longer term.
Which, God help us, we will get to before the end of this session.
That's why you call it long term.
This is kind of on the fence here whether this is short term or long term. The outcome is more rational allocation. So.
Yes, I guess I'm going to say the same thing. I cannot seem to stick with the old saw that a closed mouth gathers no feet, and maybe I shouldn't. We show more restraint than the legislature does. Historically, Texas has gone for access. Yes, I know. No, we have. We have built for accesses in this state since the 1970s. We're in many ways overbuilt. There's a counter problem, though, that's not taken care of here. Fred and I were talking about, I'll bring your name into this. There's so much specialized on a campus, specialized space on a campus, that a dollar allocation report like this really doesn't make a lot of sense. What can you do with the strength of materials laboratory, even though you have a very productive mechanical engineering program? You can teach one class a semester in there. So costing out like this is not near as meaningful as other approaches that we've been taking. But the fact is, we can't build an institution across the street from everyone. We've got to remember that. We need to get the allocation of space in our classrooms or the use up. Okay, and that's really what we're after, isn't it? Okay.
Can we proceed? Yes. Excellent discussion. All right, let's go to making productivity and continuous improvement. This is on page 14. And there, I've listed the two major sentences, very short sentences, and there are several details underneath those, so I can only imagine what this discussion might be. But I'm going to ask that we try to limit this to 20 minutes for this and 20 minutes for the next 3 long-term actions. So if you will take 5 minutes just rating these 2 and writing any comments you have, and then I'm going to poll the groups. The long-term actions as well. You've had time to look at the detail, the A through E under 1. Why don't we start, I don't care which group starts, but are there things that you oppose, A through E? Any things you vehemently oppose or have issue with? This group over here is just dying to go first.
Well, we had 2 things. One, I think we agree that the Continuous Improvement Council is a good idea, but we don't think it should be a state agency. It ought to be, we ought to focus it on higher education. It ought to be inside the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board.
Okay.
Number 2, we believe there's some confusion in the introductory paragraph on page 9. It says, in short, they call for changes to, quote, business as usual, unquote. Many of the best practice ideas came before the committee took the form not of doing business differently, but of doing business as usual more efficiently. We think that the conversation that we had was focused on doing something fundamentally different rather than tweaking along the edges and tweaking business as usual. So I don't know if we're reading this wrong or if it needs to be wordsmithed to make it more bold in stating that we want to do something, we want to do things fundamentally different.
We still have Dennis, right? On the phone?
Yes.
Okay. Rich, did you have something to add to that?
No, I mean, I think that that much of what preceded this in the other recommendations were really the fundamental changes. Here, what we're talking about is there are things you're already doing, like purchasing energy and all of those things, but doing them in a much more cost-effective way.
I just wanted to make sure you had heard that, although we're taking copious notes. How about your table back here, Scott? Any comments about number 1?
Well, I guess generally speaking, again, many of these are sort of input-driven. I think there are ways to continue to improve them. Related to the sort of mandate to increase institutional efficiency, that is more output-driven. But that becomes, I mean, that really is the crux. I don't know how one measures that and reports on it. The one comment I would make that I just want to put on the table that permeates at least some of my thoughts is, and I guess it's just my own experience, but the value of our current governing boards in the process. And I don't want to lose track of that, because many of these things, I'm trying to find one of these issues that we haven't been before our board talking about, answering to, whether it's space, not just related to these efficiencies, but even going back. There are clearly policy outcomes that supersede sort of one institution, one system, that are going to need to be structured for statewide that makes some sense. But many of these, even sort of space allocations, or many of these come into understanding what the best practices are, sort of knowing what the tools in the toolbox is so that we can draw from them, but then, in my mind, delegating some of that responsibility to the governing boards. And I only know that because, I can tell you our board is actively engaged distance education. I mean, there's just a variety of those kinds of things. So that came through a little bit more, I guess, as I considered these. But, clearly we need to become more efficient and work in that direction. So.
Okay. Anyone else on number 1, any of those details that you want to discuss? Number 1?
I think I'm on the right one. On page 9, part C.
Yeah, short-term action. C is a part of number 1, yes.
Yeah, I don't see, it doesn't, changing your class schedule doesn't do a darn thing. The only thing that determines space utilization is how much space you have and how many students you have. You can reorganize them during the day. That doesn't make sense. unless you're looking for something that I don't understand there. Maybe institutions that have far...
Microphone.
Yeah. Oh, maybe this deals with institutions that have a great space shortage or something, but for most of us, it is the fact you can reorganize all you want to, but you're not going to increase your space utilization.
I think that was in response to building new buildings as opposed to building new buildings.
Okay,
as I recall, that was...
It needs to be clarified then. Okay. And what does E mean? Adopted computer-based assessment system for developmental education. What does that mean?
That really goes back to, I think, what was intended by that so-called single diagnostic. I think that is sort of a duplication of the 1E, as I read it, of the earlier reference to a single diagnostic tool for use to measuring college readiness. But here it does specifically state for developmental education.
Yeah, but is it for entry into developmental ed or exit?
I think it means exit. You have successfully completed developmental. That's how I interpreted it.
Well, then
David, can you shed light on, are we interpreting this correctly? Or Dennis? On 1E, at the almost at the very top.
That one, in some way, it's the same. It would be the same diagnostic because if you can pass it, then you can exit developmental ed. If you on the front end, if you can't pass it, you get placed into developmental ed.
Yeah, I'm not sure this one needs to be included. This comes out of our earlier discussion about the single assessment, and one reason institutions wanted to go to multiple assessments was for this walk-in student on a community college campus, the previous exam, the TASP, had to go back to the test developer, and so it took time to actually get them into what they needed on a timely basis. If we go to a single assessment, it will be computer-based. It will have to be. So,
just clarify that. So.
Yeah, we can clarify it.
Yeah, that's what I wrote down because it's. Dennis just confirmed that what I thought was the case, but it's obviously not clear just from the reading of it.
It's directly connected to that other recommendation, really.
Ernie? Is this a requirement for getting into community college? Is that, or any college? Not any college, but community college. Open enrollment schools. Does acing this mean that you're college ready, or what does it mean?
What this means is that you don't have to go through developmental education.
Does it?
This is part of this legislative requirement for the TSI, Texas Success Initiative, and so. But if you have if you meet essentially the cutoff point on the SAT, the ACT, these other tests I mentioned earlier, you don't have to do this. But if you haven't done that, you have to be assessed.
So in some way, shape, or form, it means I'm college ready if I pass it, right?
That's what it implies.
Have we found the magic bullet?
That is the AccuPlacer now, I believe. Right, David?
Well, this would replace the AccuPlacer, and is there, I mean, let's be honest here. Whatever the score is something people have decided. Some could argue that it should be higher to truly be college ready, but it's a level at which everyone's agreed is a reasonable level at this point in time.
But would you get rid of university developmental education if you couldn't get in unless you passed this exam? This asking the question.
Well, that's a different issue. I mean, each institution determines its own admission requirements at the university level. The only state requirement now starts in the fall, which the minimum you have to have completed the recommended high school program, but most schools go much beyond that in terms of the admission requirements.
So to get in, I have to go beyond this, is what you're saying? In most cases, the open enrollment?
This really, it's really most relevant to community colleges because they're the most likely schools to have walk-ins to begin with. Although we do have some universities who register people at the last minute. Most systems have. I'm sorry?
No, go ahead, Dave. I'm sorry. I was just talking about...
No, I can't get in unless I pass this.
No.
You just have to go through developmental ed.
Yeah, 4-year is not.
But you're not going to pass the required math course.
Right.
That's right. That's all.
If
You
you
won't-
take this and you don't pass it, I know it blended. If you take this and you don't pass it, you got to take 3 courses before they will accept that you're able to do university math. Whether that's
And they're
the case or
sequential.
not.
So, and again, you know, if you need developmental courses, there are different approaches depending on what the diagnostic is. My question was, I thought we were doing pretty good with the acupuncture. I mean, I'm not that in tune with that. I thought this was an exit exam to kind of, standardize the rigor of the mental ed courses. But if it's, to enter them, we've already got the acupuncture. I don't know why.
Well, currently, right now, there isn't really an exit score to get out of developmental ed anymore. That went away in a previous legislative session. I don't know which. So.
Maybe you're suggesting, though, based on our previous discussion, that e-property be deleted.
Well, I think they're directly connected, and if we're going to have one assessment, it needs to absolutely has to be available in a computer-based assessment system if it's going to be effective at a community college. And really, the one reason AccuPlacer began to be used is it was one of the few computer-based assessments available at the time.
But what was just said was that this would be a diagnostic assessment that would replace the AccuPlacer because it would be more effective.
It could be the AccuPlacer. A decision hasn't been made. One decision has to be made on one assessment. That's one of the candidates. Yes. So they can finish it, and then you can talk to the counselor or advisor and say, here's what you need to do.
We need
can
that
maybe start you the same day.
There are walk-ins in senior institutions that have not completed developmental work. And Roberto, I hate to disagree. Our luck with AccuPlacer is not good as far as predicting their ability to go into advanced courses. We need to probably, that needs to be upped, and I'm really for this if it can be.
Yeah, as I said,
and again, what we're talking about is just placing out of developmental work, not being admitted or not admitted to.
No, this does not have to do with admission.
And I agree with you to some degree, Judge. Don't apologize, because I think there's a disconnect in terms of how the AccuPlacer tests and how the high schools test, for example. And so, when there's a non-alignment like that, you're going to have more failures, I believe. And this has been related to me by the superintendents in San Antonio. There's also another issue. A lot of our students that come in to the AccuPlacer experience are like 25, 26, 27, 28-year-olds, even in the higher age. And so we're working on doing some prep courses before they take the AccuPlacer, because we don't want to pigeonhole them into something without really giving them a chance to get back into the stream of learning. And so there's some issues in the whole developmental ed issue that we're really looking at real hard right now. Because we've heard the message from the commissioner that we're not doing as well as we should do.
Remember, your earlier recommendation was talking about tying the single assessment to the college and career readiness standards, so they really reflect the same thing.
Alignment.
So they have to be aligned.
The whole idea is that the same assessment would be the equivalent of an outcomes test for high school students and an incomes test for community colleges.
Sure.
And the public schools are now required and are developing end-of-course assessments, which include a college readiness component based on the college and career readiness standards. And it's going to be a number of years before all that's in place, but so that has to be parallel as well.
Well, another example, Fred, in terms of alignment, I think you're very correct there. We're sitting down with one of the superintendents in San Antonio, and his concern was, for example, the students at the high school level are allowed to use graphic calculators when they take their tests. Okay? They're not allowed during the AccuPlacer. So these kids are trained to use the graphic calculators, but they can't use them when they get into the AccuPlacer. So what's our biggest area of developmental ed needs, and that's in math. And so we need to do some alignment there.
And the reason for that, by the way, some tests are created in a less rigorous way because they're not going to allow graphics calculators because everyone can't afford them. So the tests are more rigorous when you allow the graphics calculator. So, there are a number of things that have to be aligned.
We've got to discuss this.
So is this something we can do short term if the end product needs to be coordinated with and relied on
We're going to have to, because we have $5 million that are funding developmental demonstration projects, and those have been identified, the locations, and part of that's going to require that we identify the single assessment and the computer. We have to do all that by at least the end of those projects, but that will be incorporated, and you'll have to really have some more technical examination of that to make sure the assessments are really worthwhile.
Can the AccuPlacer be moved back into high school?
When we do that, Bernie, when we do that, we do go back and give them the AccuPlacer. Like we've got early colleges, and to determine if they're able to start taking college courses, let's say in their sophomore, junior year of high school, they have to pass the AccuPlacer for us, and so that determines whether they can or not. So yeah, you can take it further back. Now, it's not a consistent practice, and right now for us, it's with the early colleges. One of the discussions we've had is that we need to start doing that with some of our targeted school districts so that we can start helping them with the reduction of developmental ed need as they come into the college system.
I vote we move AccuPlacer.
Can I get in here? I think if we can go on to number 2, we have a chance to finish the last 3. So number 2 is creating administrative efficiencies. Let me just go to the first one, expand even further the size of procurement pools. Does anybody have an issue with that they want to discuss or give us feedback on? I'm saying,
why is the UT and A&M? They're already doing it.
They are.
The sense here was they're not exempt. The sense was this is where we're trying to take a lot of the best practices. And the UT and A&M systems are already realizing the scale to have effectively driven down their costs for a lot of these purchasing pools. But we're not sure that other institutions, for instance, it might be very powerful if the community colleges banded into a statewide pool, and if all other systems or institutions banded it,
Okay, that's fine.
And it's most likely the community colleges, because if you're not in the UT and A&M system, I think all the other systems are in the state system select.
Okay.
So they already have that purchasing power, because the community colleges that
outside was not intended as an exemption, but as a it's to encourage creative plagiarism.
Okay, anybody else have a comment they want to make on A? Okay. B, expand TechShare, the current online library system. Who has an issue with that they need to bring forward at this point? That's 2B. No?
That's 2B.
Closing low producing.
I take a vote.
Oh, wait, I'm looking. Well, which one am I looking at?
You may be on which version are you on?
2B6.
I was looking at the
producing
cost.
degree programs.
Oh, you're looking. Oh, okay.
Isn't that where we are? On page 10?
You're going from the cost estimates?
Yeah, I was going from the cost estimates.
Because the cost estimates are not 100% complete on all recommendations.
Okay.
And they would reference an earlier version of the document.
Let me just read it. Oh, okay, so 2B is, closing down degree programs which are low producing.
This is so self-serving, I'm sorry. Could we just add the word most? I really do agree with this. However, we're in a mode to expand our physics program. We produce 2 or 3 graduates a year. They're outstanding, go to great schools, graduate schools. I don't want to close that program down. I don't want to have it closed down. Our physics professors are very busy teaching lower level classes for engineering, chemistry, so forth. But we need a little wiggle room to be good institutions. Yeah.
Okay, any other comments on that one? Oh, I'm just wearing y'all down. All right, C, consolidate and outsource the hosting of common applications such as email and back office administrative system. Rich had...
I would suggest that we change to evaluate consolidation and outsourcing of administrative and business systems. Consolidate and outsource. Limited term, common applications in some sectors may be where you host a piece of software on a computer. And I think the discussion's been much broader than that.
Agreed.
Again, these are just best practices that we're encouraging other institutions or systems to evaluate and adopt where appropriate. So, I think
Okay. D, review the current statewide data system and identify additional information required for decision-making and policy analysis.
I agree. Just one comment. If I could change, instead of identify additional information, if we could maybe identify critical information. I think part of the review is we may be collecting information that we don't need.
This is going to be especially important if we move to momentum points in terms of our funding.
Okay.
Good data.
Yeah, I think D could be I would agree, it could be more powerfully written to look just as hard at what we can kill as to what we have. So.
I just want to point out that the information is, everything there drives the creation of the formula in terms of the data system. So it's not, I don't think it's the information you're talking about, but I agree with the language.
Okay, any other comments on D?
Maybe I'm not understanding.
Spit in the microphone.
Maybe I'm not understanding exactly what that says. Review the current statewide data system. Do we have a statewide data system?
I don't think we do.
Yeah, actually you do. We have a PETA 16 data system in Texas. It includes the public schools, higher education. Every item in the accountability system is generated from that data. The formulas are generated from that information. It comes from you guys.
But is that the one? Is that the one that we're talking about?
Yeah.
That is a list of all the reports that we have to produce. It's not the reports. It's a list of the reports. It's got almost 500 entries,
and very few of those come to us. And we're working.
Well, that's my question. I mean, if we're looking,
maybe you need to add a more broad. This was generated by someone with a different item, but. We are working on. We would be glad to entertain that. Ever since I've been here, we've been dealing with this issue and eliminating reports. In fact, we have a list of reports we're recommending to the legislature that be deleted, including the uniform recruitment and retention. In fact, we're just going to delete that one.
Are you the?
That would be you'd be the one we're looking to help us, but even though it's not in your data system, to coordinate so that we can say the same thing.
Susan Brown's going to testify on this Thursday. We can share with you her testimony before. I know you're going to testify as well. And I hope all the institutions will look at it. We just got something from the business officers with 4 reports that they wanted eliminated. None of the 4 come to us. But we think we could work with institutions to coordinate with other state agencies where it's going to other state agencies either to supply it or maybe do something together to reduce the reporting. We have to report more than we'd like to as well.
So you don't manage a centralized kind of a data warehouse of all everything that Mike has in his system? Is that how things run?
No, we actually have had in place something called the Data Collection Committee for 15 years, where we actually even monitor what comes from our advisory committees who usually want us to collect or survey more information than we think is necessary or that we can get from our existing system. Many of the reports come through legislation, and then they're never sort of sunsetted. We've actually been talking to the council of chancellors and presidents about some ways to address that. It is the case that we've identified reports that we don't think anyone's used recently that we're required to produce.
Is there a parent-student kind of interface or portal so that they can tell what's going on with the money that they are about to spend?
It's the legislature required the creation of, I've forgotten what it's not a report card. It's called something else. And there's one for the legislature and there's one for parents and their students. And on our part, we've brought in a consultant to redo our website because the reality is we have too much data out there and less is more. We need to squeeze it down, make sure that people can easily find what they need, and that includes parents and so that's in process right now.
We need to move on here. Okay, E, expand text share, current online library system. Anybody have a significant comment that they want to make? No. Your faces this time of day are...
I do, seriously. It is not, that is not expansive enough. There still needs to be a way to explore statewide, system-wide or statewide prescriptions or subscriptions, which one.
Okay. Any
That's
other?
what this is intended to do, but I think they've backed off on it in recent years, if I'm not mistaken.
Any other comments? All right, F, Statewide Continuous Improvement Council. That we've mentioned that before. Comments? This is F, 2F.
My comment made before was that I think that this document should focus on education. That should be nested inside the higher education board.
Agree, disagree, any other comments?
I'd agree. We sort of had a two-pronged thing here, and I think Ray is saying let's focus on the one, on higher education.
All right.
Can it be independent enough to report directly to the board? Should it be independent and enough to report directly to the board?
To the coordinating board?
To the coordinating board.
Can it be?
Or should it be, or anybody?
It can be. The reason I don't think it should be beyond this board, well, first of all, this group is focusing on education, and the last thing we need outside of that is another agency in state government.
No, I'm not advocating that. Just independence for the function.
Yeah, I think it can be not unlike an audit committee of a board of directors.
Okay, I favor that.
Okay, any other comments on that? All right, let's, oh wait, we have one more. G, encourage the governor's office to create a director of continuous improvement.
And that's where it took on the more statewide approach. And this came from the testimony that we actually referred to in one of our meetings, but it was last October's board meeting. The state of Iowa, which has adopted lean continuous improvement, has adopted it for multiple agencies. And so they have a cabinet level position that reports to their governor. It's the director of continuous improvement. I have no idea what, I think it's a relatively lean office with, not a huge budget or not a huge expense. But this is broader than just focusing on higher education. So if the sense of the committee is, let's stop while we're ahead, this doesn't have to be included.
We're ahead. I'm going to have David over there for that.
Not being tongue-in-cheek on me, Omar.
So basically, y'all are asking to delete G. Okay.
That's how I interpreted Ray's recommendation.
I see it. I do kind of see a dotted line from whoever leads up the coordinating board's function that reports directly to the board. I see whoever heads that up being on the governor's continuous improvement committee.
Again, this is outside the scope of just higher education. Should the governor choose to adopt this on a more broad level, then what you described would be appropriate.
Okay.
Just the comment, G's can be deleted. I still would encourage the coordinating board to bring in speakers like they've brought in to talk about lean programs and to work with campus on it. That was excellent.
Very valuable experience.
Okay, let's just go through these on page 16 and 17, the 3 long-term actions that were listed in this report. First one was, this is on page 16, funding results. That was that the coordinating board should undertake an in-depth review of the state's higher education finance mechanisms and recommend changes necessary to align with the state's goals. Pros and cons, comments on number 1. And don't forget to circle your, there you get back there. This is on page 16 of your handout because I'm about to ask for your handouts. Agree or disagree?
You skip page 15. Coming back.
I don't think so. Did I skip page 15?
That was just comments.
Well, we kind of talked about that in progress, unless there's any additional ones.
I had one additional one.
Okay.
What you might be asking?
And I'm talking about energy efficiency and our huge utility bills that each campus has to deal with. But I'm also receptive to the ideas that people have a problem with the LEED certification process, may think it's cumbersome, too expensive. So as a short-term action, my recommendation is that LEED or comparable criteria adopted locally should be utilized for major projects, or should be considered for major projects.
There's a big difference between considered and adopted.
Well, I guess inside I don't want to create another rule. We're using that now, but okay, if you want to, my recommendation would be to require major projects be constructed according to LEED standards or comparable locally adopted criteria.
Yeah.
Scott?
Actually, and we do that, so if you put it in, that's fine. My own still preference would be encouraged. I mean, I don't know that that's, I think there's some great value to it as a reason. We've adopted it for a variety of reasons. I don't know if it's critical in terms of cost efficiency issues, but it's just, if you leave it as is, that'll be fine, but it's just not fine.
Okay, any more discussion on that? Ben?
Are you still on the finance?
We went back to 15. Yeah, do you have...
Just a couple. Again, I think you should make sure you include the Board of Regents in that issue somewhere, that it's not just the coordinating board doing the review, but the coordinating board, include the Board of Regents. The other thing that is very... I like it because it gets us away from just cost reimbursement and more toward implementing a policy that is rightfully set by the legislature. In other words, it's not just what we spend it on and then you're reimbursing us, but it's what the legislature wants, and you're going to look at formulas that push us that direction. Am I reading that correctly? Mm-hmm. Great.
Okay, it's 3 o'clock. Now, can we go to page 16 very quickly? Funding results, this first long-term action. Comments about that, and please complete your page and your scoring while we're there. Page 16. This is the long-term action, in-depth review of the state's higher education finance mechanisms so that we can align these with state goals. Any comments on this? Pros or cons? Agrees, disagrees?
I'm a little confused by it because of the fact that the coordinating board currently has 3 formula funding committees, one for the community colleges, one for the general academics, and one for the health related. So I'm not real sure what this does as compared to the current formula advisory committee approach.
Go ahead. I remember this original discussion was simply that there was something out of kilter with the state's goals, and perhaps there was a new planning initiative.
See, and I agree with you, Patty. I think that's what I understood, is that we needed to look at policy and state goals and get those to align. That's why I voted strongly in favor of this, because I think that is needed in the state. We really need to do that. And I think that was one of the key success initiatives that Maryland undertook. They just whittle away everything if they didn't align with policy and goals.
Yeah, the only thing I was going to add is that 1 and 2 are kind of two halves to the same study. One dealt with finance mechanisms, and the other with growth to meet student demands, which is another way of saying, do we have the facilities and are we properly funding the facilities? And I'm not so sure these don't blend together into the same, what we've called a strategic growth plan. It is about aligning policies with goals. And making sure that, and this kind of goes to what we talked about earlier as an alternative to the whole allocation of space costs to departments, is taking that step, a further step, which is to put capital funding and maintenance funding all into one formula, and then let the institutions and systems decide how to allocate that in terms of construction, maintenance, programs, et cetera.
2 in the report itself actually is broader than just facilities. It includes different consideration of different types of institutions. It's delivery methods, which might, to some extent, alleviate the need for traditional campuses.
Yeah,
so it's a broader.
Let's say it picked up and included the facilities ideas we talked about earlier, but it also includes other alternative forms of delivery.
Yeah.
I agree. I remember a lot of discussion about this. Some of us had a discussion at lunch of what happens with institutions as we start to put new regulations on top of old regulations. And every once in a while, it's important, I think, to take a step back, take a deep breath, and make sure everything's in alignment and that we don't have conflicting goals and objectives. So I think this is very, very important.
Okay. You're talking about one specifically and two, because
one and
they're
two
intertwined. Any comments on one or two? The second one being what we just talked about in terms of the strategic growth plan. Somebody's breathing into the microphone. Yeah.
Dennis?
I thought.
Yes.
Are you breathing into your phone?
I may be.
As long as you don't snore.
Are you breathing?
Are you breathing?
It's getting harder.
Okay. Any comments on number two? Additional comments? Okie dokie. All right, and last one. E-book. This issue was about the loss of revenue. So it's the digital learning environment for students that incorporate 3 critical technologies.
Page 17.
Page 17. It's the very last page of your worksheets.
Didn't we discuss this in the short term at some point here?
Sure. Yeah.
On page 12.
Yes, this is the long-term action that was attached to that one.
Short term was to do more piloting, and the long term, I guess because of the concern about unintended consequences. I don't know if this is...
I don't. I would hate to see us take the position that we're going to maintain the same old because of a little bit of loss in revenue when we know that technology is moving us forward.
Exactly.
We may have to solve the revenue issue in another way, but we shouldn't be holding back technology to make a little bit of revenue.
Exactly. The other thing is, are professors tethered to the use of textbooks as opposed to the use of content wherever they find it?
Anybody know the answer to that question?
They're already posting stuff on the web for students to access. I mean, market forces are going to push this along whether we want to.
Yeah, right. But I just want to know that the professors are not forced to use a textbook. Okay, I'm happy.
But don't forget the aging professors. So, there are those in Department of Higher Education that talk about those who refuse to step down. And so you do have a problem with those who may not be interested in technology. My only concern is, are we talking about colleges and universities providing some type of technology to students as their incoming freshmen? We talk about the new technologies, mobile commuting and all of that, but there will still be those students that don't have. There's still going to be a technological gap in what students can afford as freshmen. So is this in some sense talking about how colleges and universities would help with acquiring technology as these students come into the fold?
Well, it doesn't say specifically that.
I wouldn't think it would. No more than we could provide them with textbooks.
And the discussion here was that the textbooks is such a big portion of the amount of money that the kids have to pay that long term this will be less expensive.
Well, there's some textbooks that cost as much as Patty's Apple iBook, whatever it is over here.
iBook, is that what you said?
iBook, I don't know what the whatever it is.
I didn't need it, but I wanted it.
I just bought a chemistry book for my daughter that costs more than that. So I mean, you have to put it in the context, and that's going to be much cheaper. This is laptops are much cheaper.
Ending comments. Microphone.
One of the things that I'm trying to get our presidents to require, again, I don't know that it ought to come from at the coordinating board level or legislative level, but we want to add to this posting online. I want the professors to, when they list their books, I want them to also list the cost of that book new at our on-campus bookstore. I don't want all the explanations of how it can be different. I want the professors to know how much the book cost. It's like doctors writing prescriptions. Doctors have no idea how much the medicine costs. You don't know how much it costs because you pay $35. It's actually $335. Same thing with textbooks. They have no idea how much it costs.
Actually get those textbooks free.
Just like their space.
Given to
In
the
fact, they do
by
get them
the
free.
publisher.
You're right.
You get them free.
But they do not know what it costs. And so, just as public information, we ought to, I hate to use the word require, but we should require that they post the cost of the books that they're going to have.
Student
my
Regents
son
mentioned that they sort of cited that in the report as well, that at least in their limited analysis, they found most of the faculty didn't have any idea what the textbooks
they have no
cost.
idea. My son last semester took 16 hours. Textbooks cost $1,200. He tried to resell them. He got $65.
Wow.
That's not made up.
Any parting comments?
Regarding this item or
Anything.
let me overall. On the state, we're asking the state elected officials to require us to do 3 different things. If you go through this report, there's other times where we're asking the state legislature to mandate that we do something. I have concern about that. I have concern that if we're asking for authorization, that's different. If we don't have the authority to do it and we need that authority, that's different. But when we're asking them to mandate something we should be doing already, I have a concern. So I just want to throw out, consider replacing the legislative mandates with instead incorporating these items as items that should be considered in some kind of efficiency report or efficiency status report that could be a tool to be used by regents, by chancellors, by presidents, by state officials, by the coordinating board to measure our progress in terms of efficiency rather than create mandates for ourselves. And there are certain criteria and benchmarks that if we don't meet them, the coordinating board sends reports to the legislative budget board, to the governor, to the lieutenant governor. Maybe that's a route to go. But I think that if we feel it should be done, then let's self-report, let's examine, but let's not go to the legislature and say the only way we're going to operate appropriately is if you mandate us to do it. I have a concern about that, and I think by reporting it, everyone gets to benchmark and compare themselves against other institutions, as do our elected officials, and appropriately they can certainly take the action they see fit. But I think at first we should do it ourselves.
Doesn't that follow on to what you were saying?
Yeah. I like the concept of benchmarks better, though. I think it's a good idea.
But we can't do it all. 1 and 2 are the state elected officials. Only they can do, and they're extremely important.
Yeah, I just was counting where it said mandate under state officials and throughout this report where we're asking them to post
Current
something.
funding formulas, of course, that's recommended by the coordinating board, but adopted by the legislature and changing the Texas grant program with a few exceptions like that. They're really, I think, critical long term.
3, 4, and 6 are clearly things we can do.
That's right.
We're asking them to require.
Maybe it should be the language should be that legislature should consider the following instead of mandate.
Think about it.
And if not, then
I think
eliminate it. I mean,
I agree with Rich in the sense that we don't want legislatures mandating everything for us, but at the same time, we have to start addressing some of these issues that we've identified here. And the higher education systems need to understand that if they don't start addressing them, at some point in time, even if we don't say in our recommendations that we mandate, at some point in time the legislature will step in and say, okay, enough's enough. So we have to recognize that as well.
And a public report will do that. A public report will get you there. Because if we don't take care of it ourselves, then other people will take care of it. So that's my
We will
proposal.
be judicious in trying to discern where we truly need legislative leverage and where we don't, where we can accomplish short-term results and action without it. Certainly we would prefer to go that route. But we don't want to be here 2 years from now going, well, good intentions didn't produce any results.
Any other comments?
Thank you for your leadership.
I'm on strike.
Fred?
I'm on strike.
You're on strike.
Everybody, I'm sure, has flights and travel plans since it's 10 after 3, but thank every one of you for participating, because this was a great dialogue. Nobody pulled any punches. We got honest feedback, and that's what we asked for, and we really appreciate it, right?
Fred, I had penciled on my calendar the potential of another meeting in September. Am I dreaming, or are we done, or...
I need your handouts before you leave. I need your handouts.
September 21.
If people want copies of their handouts, you want them to write their name on there?
Yeah, if you want a copy of it, write your name on it. I won't put it on.